to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We take life back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Common Sense for the 21st Century by Roger Hallam. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse. This is from the foreword. I was there for the past 20 years. Climate activism. It didn't work. We protested in our hundreds of millions. It didn't work. We raised billions to reach people and politicians. It didn't work. We signed countless online petitions. They didn't work. We looked to the United Nations to resolve the crisis. It didn't work. We trusted progressive politicians and their reforms. That didn't work. Al Gore had a big concert and a PR campaign. It didn't work. Countless NGOs, non-governmental organizations, did their best, and it didn't work. I worked with green NGO campaigns, champagne environmentalists, and lying politicians. I was wasting my time. I had a clue back in 2007 that there might be a fundamental flaw with the reformist approach, the problem with the political influence of the industrial billionaires like the Koch brothers and other fossil fuel bosses. It was another warm night in Los Angeles. I was invited to an exclusive event. A Tesla Roadster prototype was going to be shown to press and guests. We took turns riding around the block. I watched in amazement as the Tesla was at the end of the street in the blink of an eye, with barely a sound. I felt like a caveman seeing a television. Incredible. While I was working on a campaign in 2007, I had an idea for how to save the world with a massive music event and a huge fundraising effort led by celebrities to fund the biggest PR campaign to save the environment. It would be a huge global event, just like Live Aid. I sought out a prominent journalist at the Tesla event to tell about my scheme and bask in the glory of his praise. The journalist was Vijay Vithswaram from The Economist, now a life member of this Council on Foreign Relations. After listening carefully to my concept, he smiled and laughed. I was stunned. Laughter? How could I be so wrong? Vijay wasn't being cruel or unkind. He thought I was naive. He said, the fossil fuel industry has enough money to outspend any public relations campaign you might try by 100 times. He carried on talking, but I had stopped listening. I had my answer. He was right. Crestfallen, I sheepishly nodded and walked away. Over the next 12 years, I watched as fossil fuel companies used their vast financial capital to buy political parties, trick NGOs into fruitless schemes like the U.S. Cap and Trade Initiative, sow doubt about climate science in the public discourse, and slow policy reform to a snail's pace. Their strategy worked. As climate skepticism continued to spread, climate change mitigation dropped down voters' priorities. With Trump and Putin in power, it was over. I quit climate campaigning. Then I heard about Extinction Rebellion closing 5 bridges in London. Then they closed central London in April 2019. This was something different. I met Roger Hallam, and he explained his ideas for a radical plan to create real change. This included, first, tell the truth. Climate skepticism was pushed by the mainstream media, which spread doubt on climate science like a plague, leaving inaction in its wake. The scale of the crisis is being played down, and we must get the truth out. Second, nonviolent civil disobedience. We need to get arrested, tens of thousands of us, more. No more protests, no more petitions. Instead, nonviolent civil disobedience, lots of it, and on a large scale. Close down cities until the politicians take action, or until the people do. Third, universalism. In other words, the ecological and climate crisis should not be owned by any political ideology, culture, age, or gender. As Roger Hallam says, we all have a stake in the future. We should all be allowed to engage in action. I was convinced. We need a new approach to save ourselves and the planet. We need to spark a worldwide rebellion. We need some common sense for the 21st century. That foreword was written by, quote, anonymous climate activist. So this now is the introduction to the book. It is time to grow up and see the world as it is. There are some things which are undeniably real. There are some things we cannot change, and one of those is the law of physics. Ice melts when the temperature increases. Crops die in a drought. Trees burn in forest fires. Because these things are real, we can also be certain about what the future holds. We are now heading into a period of extreme ecological collapse. Whether or not this leads to the extinction of the human species largely depends on whether revolutionary changes happen within our societies within the next decade. This is not a matter of ideology, but of simple math and physics. The United Nations has estimated that we need to reduce carbon emissions by half within a decade to have a 50% chance of avoiding a global catastrophe. Of course, this is likely to be an underestimate, as recent science shows permafrost melting 90 years earlier than forecasted, and Himalayan glaciers melting twice as fast as expected. The book, Common Sense for the 21st Century, by Roger Hallam, the co-founder of the Extinction Rebellion. The subtitle, Only Nonviolent Rebellion Can Now Stop Climate Breakdown and Social Collapse.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Hey, happy Wednesday. In just a moment, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for the hour, taking your calls in a National Progressive Townhall Meeting. So if you have questions, thoughts, suggestions, whatever it may be for Congressman Pocan, you can get in line right now at 202-808-9925. We'll be there in just a moment. Professor Richard Wolff will be with us in the second hour of our program. Is there a new BRICS nation, Brazil, Russia, India, China? Is there a new BRICS nation plot to kill the dollar and bring the U.S. economy to its knees? We'll be talking about that with Professor Wolff. Also, the most successful con in American history laid bare. Hint, it goes back to the Powell memo. This is my op-ed today from HartmannReport.com. We'll be talking about that in the second hour of the program. And the real stakes for the 2022 election, that in the third hour of the program. This is pretty amazing. The alarming plot to radically rewrite the U.S. Constitution is now picking up steam, particularly among American billionaires. And a geeky science alert. Will the next pandemic come from melting glaciers? So a lot on the program today for the full 3 hours. But our first hour is a National Progressive Townhall Meeting with Congressman Mark Pocan. We call it Middays with Mark. Congressman Pocan represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He is a former a member and former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He's on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees. His website is pocan.house.gov, P-O-C-A-N, and you can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back to the program. What's on your mind this morning?
Hey, Tom. Good to be with you. I'm actually traveling later today to Iowa and Nebraska for a few days, helping out some candidates across the country.
Hey, good on you.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, Tom, it's interesting. Every time I go, especially when we head towards Omaha, a number of people who listen to your program show up at events, and they mention that they listen to this on a regular basis. So
that's great.
Yeah, looking forward to hearing that. Hey, the only thing, Tom, yesterday I listened to you. I was coming back from New York, and I had a drive from Milwaukee here during your program, and you were talking about the power of three, the messaging that the Democrats should have. And I just wanted to share something because, interestingly, we actually did have 3 points that we were supposed to be talking about this year. And I agree with you. Pretty much choice is what you're hearing. But here's what the 3 points were. We were going to talk about criminalizing women's health care, including birth control, as they're trying to roll back other rights like marriage equality as well. Their plan to end Social Security and Medicare in 5 years, although in Wisconsin, Ron Johnson in 1 year, taking away people's hard-earned money from tens of millions of Americans. And the third was they continue to attack our democracy, undermine free elections, and make it harder for Americans to vote. So
strong stuff.
Yeah, if it had been used perhaps in a way that people heard it. I agree with you. I think, what's happened is much of the message has really ended on choice. We know that a while back there was some polling and democracy was very important. New York Times did a piece recently saying, but not enough to actually move people maybe. And Social Security, honestly, I have not heard enough. In Wisconsin, we are using it because we're fortunate to have Ron Johnson, one of the biggest Social Security bashers that's out there, while the Republican Study Committee and others want to put it on the chopping block every 5 years. Ron Johnson's proposed doing it every single year, put it on the chopping block. He would actually like to see us take away people's benefits as often as every year. So those are the issues that we were supposed to be out there on. I completely agree with you on the patterns with the power of three and everything else. But I did want to mention that because they gave us, and then we also proactively, just so you know, talk about what Democrats have done, and that is in lowering costs, things like the Inflation Reduction Act and other measures we did. Better paying jobs. Clearly, people are making more in jobs right now as we've been coming out of COVID, and safer communities that contrast with some of the crime message. So for whatever it's worth, I wanted to share that because I thought you had a very thoughtful, great discussion with listeners that yesterday, and I wanted to make sure I let you know what I think we were supposed to be doing, at least, and what I think some of us still try to talk about.
Well, thank you, and thanks for listening to the program. The kind of secondary point that I wrote in the article that kind of got lost in the online rant was that when you look at the media and what the media is talking about constantly, which really gets fed back to us in opinion polls. The media shapes the issues more than, frankly, I think more than politicians.
Absolutely.
You've got the media talking about critical race theory. You've got the media talking about trans kids. These are, literally, there is no critical race theory being taught in American public schools. It's a complete fabrication, a lie that the Republicans came up with. And similarly, trans kids in public schools is not a problem. There is no, to the best of my knowledge, there's no trans child in America who's ever committed a crime, and yet they're, in school, and yet they're talking about, oh my God, they're predators, and they're snooping around the bathrooms and all this kind of, basically homophobic baiting. And because the Republicans talk about it so much, the media picks it up. And this is, in my opinion, something that the Democrats have failed to realize, is that if they were simply to take, for example, the crime issue and put it entirely in the frame of guns and pound on it, they could put the Republicans on the defensive very effectively. Go ahead.
Well, no, I agree. But one other observation, too, I would have as far as the media, I think to some degree the mainstream media also is looking for what's going to give them a sexy story, right? And going after, clearly Republicans punching down at trans kids is pretty disgusting on multiple levels. But that if that gives them something colorful to be able to put out there with extremists like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, is not representative, I think, of all Republicans across the country, but you'd think so, certainly by her positions and policies she's putting out there. That's what they like. And, I think we should have been, especially on Social Security, far more aggressive on compare.
Well, and you get 7 children a day dying from guns in America. 7 mangled dead bodies every day could be put on television or something like it. I think your point is well taken. but in most of these cases, you can come up with lurid,
Right.
media-worthy examples. So I'm with you. Anything else that you wanted to talk about before we pick up calls? Because the board is just slammed here.
No, let's just take the calls, because I'll tell you, it's mainly what I do these days is out helping people around the country, and especially in the upper Midwest. So that's kind of what I'm working on. And we're hearing many of the same things that your listeners bring up on a regular week. I hear as I go around. I guess, my biggest concern nationally, just electorally, is, a lot of the colleges were decimated 2 years ago with COVID. There was no organization. And as you know, often whoever was a freshman or sophomore now is a junior or senior, and they'd take over these organizations. But they didn't have an organization 2 years ago with COVID. So we're trying to rebuild organizations. And I think that's an important demographic, especially for Democrats around the country, because, I think younger people agree with us. Certainly, all people agree with us on the issues. But that is one thing that I've been dealing a lot with, and I'll be heading to a campus in Iowa today.
Good on you. Okay, let's pick up some phone calls here. Ed in Chicago, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yeah, Congressman, I know you get this, so this is more geared towards the Democratic Party, and this is making me furious. I'm seeing every single ad on abortion rights, every single ad. Your largest voting block is retirees and seniors. I have not seen a single ad on the Republicans openly talking about getting rid of Social Security and Medicare. This is a political gift from the gods for the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party is. I'm speechless. Why aren't they running ads on this? I don't get it. Can you explain that to me?
Yeah, Ed, I'm with you. In fact, I recently had one of the leadership offices talk to my office, because I've been very aggressive on the Social Security message. Why aren't we doing more? And they tried to show us some of the contrast ads where people are coming out and claiming some Democrats in swing districts are proposing a payroll tax increase, and of course out of context. But it's one little 3-second hit of a commercial that they're going to do no matter what, saying that we're pro-tax. In reality, we could be showing that we're going to give people greater benefits and extend Social Security for 60, 70 years into the future. I think there's a good message with that. And you're right to compare it. In Wisconsin, Mandela Barnes, I think, will be doing, if he's not already doing ads on this, because, Ron Johnson wanted to put it on the chopping block every year, even more extreme than the mainstream Republicans, who've been saying every 5 years. But also Ron Johnson has a theory, Tom, on how to solve the job problem. He wants people to come out of retirement and come back to work. So he wants you to come back and work more and get less in benefits. That would be a great commercial, according to Ed, and I agree with him.
Amazing, amazing. Lisa in Trevor, Wisconsin, you're on the air, Lisa, with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to bring up the financial aspect of women not being able to get abortions. I keep on hearing, obviously, the Democrats are bringing up abortion left and right, and the Republicans are going after the financial aspects because of, the gas prices going up, et cetera, et cetera. And we need to address things on the financial level as well. I think that a lot of people don't realize the expense, and I don't understand why, again, just like the last caller, too, bringing up Medicare, Social Security, et cetera, that we need to look at the financial aspects. For example, in Wisconsin, the average cost of a cesarean delivery is over $20,000. If you don't have insurance, you might as well be paying $1 million for cesarean delivery, which is 1 in 3 births. So can you do anything to bring this about, to push this kind of advertising, so that we can shift that understanding? The men are going to be responsible for the child support as well.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, though, Lisa, that I'm not sure if I'd necessarily want to make that the contrast to the inflation issue, because I think we have a much better contrast on inflation. I agree with you. That is one of the many reasons why we don't want to go back to 1849 law in Wisconsin, which you and I would be living under, because that's the situation in our state with no exceptions. But I think when it comes to, inflation, we can point to, one, we did the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to help lower costs for healthcare and prescription drugs and energy and other things. But really, the fact that on gas prices, for example, I would argue, a year ago, March, when we had the freeze hit down south, and Texas, never builds their infrastructure, and the power grid went down, and processing, the oil refineries went down, the gas prices went up, and they stayed up artificially high. And we actually have audio of oil executives saying they were keeping production down in the United States in order to maximize shareholder profits. I mean, we're seeing this in a lot of industries, but especially on the energy front and gasoline. And we should be talking about that more because that's one of the major factors. And these are the very people who fund the Republican campaign. So, again, I agree with what we've been talking about. There's a better contrast that we could be putting out there that I don't see us doing enough.
Yeah, not to mention the fact that we're exporting 20% of the oil we produce in the United States, or 30%, 29%. And then the oil companies are saying, oh, but we need more leases. It's crazy.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah. And they still won't increase production here anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark, with Congressman Mark Pocan of Wisconsin, former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, current member in good standing, of course. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
More of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment, 18 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. Paul in San Leandro, California. Hey, Paul, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom. Hey, Congressman Pocan, I was wondering if you remember in 2018, Speaker Pelosi promised to step aside in 2022 for the deal to get enough votes to be the Speaker in 2018. Do you and the Progressive Caucus plan her to hold to that if she doesn't voluntarily step aside?
So let me put a little clarification on that. There were a few folks that wanted someone perhaps a little more moderate or conservative to come in, and she said that to them at that time. So I'm not sure if it was a caucus promise. It's become a little larger than life, I think, what it was said at the time. However, I am in the belief that I think she's wrapping up and not likely to run again. I think I'm watching her do a lot of some tours around the world that kind of look like almost a goodbye tour. I think that people in general are kind of looking at our caucus and our caucus leadership and some of our processes and procedures and looking for some changes. And while I think we should absolutely name a building after Nancy Pelosi someday, she's done a lot of amazing things. I do believe that she herself, I think, might be deciding to do something else. So just my gut right now. But I did want to clarify what she actually said 4 years ago, because it was in reference to a few folks, and it wasn't like a caucus promise. And a lot of that's been a little bit overstated.
If she does decide to step aside, who do you see as the leading candidate for Speaker? So
I think there's a couple scenarios, Tom. One, I see Hakeem Jeffries from New York and Adam Schiff as most likely, and they're starting to have some conversations with people. And I also see Steny Hoyer possibly looking at trying to do it out of the current leadership team. Yeah. But because nothing has been said, it's very much a kind of behind the scenes, a little bit whisper conversations rather than an outright, hey, will you support me for this or that? But I think that's what most likely the scenario would be, the people looking at it.
Yeah, Jeffries and Schiff are both so eloquent. Steny, not so much. We'll see. Okay, Hamite in Danbury, Connecticut. My apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name.
Hello, Tom. Hello, the Congressman Pocan. Yes, it's Hamid.
Hamid, okay.
Like the president of Afghanistan, except with a T instead of a D.
Got it.
My thing is about the thing with cannabis. If President Biden wanted to legalize it, how could he do it? Why was it illegalized? How was it? If you guys could give a history of how, because the fourth of all people want him to just do it by executive order, but I don't think that's a good idea. And what is an executive order exactly? And when those should or not to be used?
Yeah, so an executive order is never as good as legislative action, because once something's in statute, that's the law, right? The executive order, the president has certain powers and can do some things, but those are temporary, and a future president could overturn them. So they're never as strong. What we need to do is as a Congress, is take marijuana off Schedule 1, change some of the current standards we have. I think we've addressed the banking issue. You still couldn't put money from a legal business in 18 states into the bank, and issues like that are very, very antiquated. And I think on the criminal justice side, the president was doing things, again, within his power, trying to address people who might be in prison for marijuana use. But it's just not as strong a statute. We still need to do the statute.
We're talking with Congressman Mark Pocan. We will be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Stick around. We will be right back with you. Don't touch that dial. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. There are no good solid numbers on it, but it appears that the majority of people who have Medicare Advantage programs or plans believe that they're on Medicare. This is certainly how Medicare Advantage is sold. Oh, you're missing out on benefits under Medicare. It's Medicare Part C, don't you know? C for commercial, right? But people don't realize that when you sign up for Medicare Advantage, you are leaving behind Medicare, and you may never be able to get back to it, or at least not in the way that you could have if you had signed up for it when you were 65 and you stayed with it. And now stepping into this void come Congressman Mark Pocan and Congressman Ro Khanna with the new Save Medicare Act that would prevent this kind of deceptive advertising and marketing by forbidding insurance companies and HMOs and whatnot from using the word Medicare to sell these for-profit plans or these so-called Medicare Advantage plans. We all need to be supportive of this. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Marty in Wixom, Michigan, you are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Representative. My question is about the issue of inflation. Thus far, it seems that Democrats have tended to run from this issue while the media tries to beat them up on it. Do you think that instead Democrats could take the offensive on inflation? They would seem to have two very effective arguments. First, the current inflation is global. It's not the fault of Biden and Democrats. And second, as you mentioned, Democrats have passed several major pieces of legislation to directly help fight inflation, and virtually all Republicans have voted against them. Can we take the offensive on this issue?
You know, we've tried, Marty. I'll be honest. I think the problem is, and I was explaining this to someone. I was in New York. We had a Progressive Caucus event on Monday night, and you know, talking to people who don't drive all day past a gas station and see the big sign where the price is going up. It's been a constant reminder of inflation in people's minds, and you're fighting that in the grocery stores and things. And while it's very true, exactly, I never say inflation without trying to say worldwide inflation or global inflation in front of the word, because that's exactly what we have coming out of COVID. It is a planet. This is what's happened. And we've done measures like the Inflation Reduction Act that reduce costs around healthcare and energy, as well as other things that we've done to try to turn that. I just think people are still seeing right now, if they're paying more for gas. You know, there was a refinery fire in Ohio that brought gas prices up like 40 cents a gallon here in Wisconsin. And that's a little too hard to explain. There's a temporary fire and it's going to come back down. All people know is that went up. I think we just need to explain to people that, you know, this isn't something unique to the United States. However, what is unique is that we're doing something to try to lower those costs. And we've passed a number of measures that have tried to do that. But it's still probably the number one issue hurting us, Marty, looking at November 8th.
Have you seen the Katie Porter clip that's going viral across the internet right now about corporate profits?
No.
She just, you know, pulled out one of her charts and just laid it out that so much of inflation, arguably the majority of inflation now, maybe even worldwide, maybe this is something every corporation in the world is doing, seems to be tied to massive corporate profits. Anyhow, I got to take a break here. It's 26 minutes past the hour. Was that our break music? Sorry, forgive my confusion here. We're taking a break. It's 27 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan in just a moment. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Middays with Mark with Congressman Mark Pocan. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. The subtitle is How a Gang of Wall Street Kingpins, Hedge Fund Magnates, Crooked Banks, and Venture Capitalists suckered millions out of their homes and demolished the American dream. It's quite a subtitle. This is from chapter 21, titled Triumph of the Homewreckers. Donald Trump took the oath of office on a chilly Friday morning, delivering an inaugural address that promised an end to the corruption and impotence that had widened America's historic wealth gap. He understood that his victory had been propelled by harnessing the public's rage and envy at having been left behind in the economic recovery, and that he promised that he would not forget it. Evoking FDR's famous Forgotten Man speech from 1932 that promised to prioritize the needs of, quote, the man at the bottom of the economic pyramid, Trump declared, quote, the forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no longer. Politicians had prospered, he said, but jobs had evaporated, factories closed. Quote, the establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. Their triumphs have not been your triumphs. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little chance to celebrate for struggling families all across our land. This all changes, starting right here and right now, Trump proclaimed, because this moment is your moment. It belongs to you. This is your day. This is your celebration. End of quote. The moment, however, belonged not to the great mass of struggling Americans, but to the new president's most ardent supporters, flamboyant businessmen who profited off the pain of the housing bust and were now poised to steer the ship of state for at least the next 4 years. As Trump reached out his hand and swore to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, his close friend and inaugural committee chair, Tom Barrack, stood behind him, smiling in a blue scarf and black overcoat. Afterward, Barrack and Trump embraced at the U.S. Capitol's inaugural platform. The homewreckers had arrived. Barrack didn't take an official position in the Trump administration, reportedly turning down an offer to be White House Chief of Staff, Treasury Secretary, or Ambassador to Mexico. Roger Stone told me he could have had any position he wanted, but working for the government would have meant making a lot less money. I don't think he has the belly for public service, Stone observed. Other homewreckers had no such qualms. If they changed the rules of the game now, they could make more money later. Steve Mnuchin, by now dubbed the foreclosure king by his critics, was confirmed as Treasury Secretary. His top deputy at One West, the bank, Joseph Otting, became the nation's chief bank regulator, the comptroller of the currency. Wilbur Ross, the bankruptcy tycoon who bought Florida's Bank United, became the Commerce Secretary, charged with everything from negotiating trade deals to overseeing the U.S. Census. Steve Schwarzman, the chairman of Blackstone, became chair of the White House's Strategic and Policy Forum, a group of business leaders who were to meet regularly with Trump. Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase was named vice chair. Though the group disbanded over the summer after Trump's statement that bigotry and violence on many sides were responsible for a white nationalists killing a counter-protester in Charlottesville, Virginia, Schwarzman, along with Barrack, is said to be among a small group of outsiders, including Sean Hannity, who are put directly through to the president rather than being routed through the normal communications channels. Hannity reportedly chats with Trump nightly. Schwarzman has flown on Air Force One. On February 12, 2017, less than a month into Trump's presidency, while the commander-in-chief was dining with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe of Japan at his Mar-a-Lago golf club, Schwarzman threw a massive 70th birthday bash at his Four Winds estate, barely a mile and a half away. This time, neither Donald nor Melania Trump could make it, but daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner did, along with Mnuchin, Ross, and a who's who of high finance and culture, from Henry Kravis, co-founder of the hostile takeover firm Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, to the fashion designer Donatella Versace. The party featured live camels, trapeze artists, fireworks, and a gondolier. Schwarzman's tennis courts were covered with Asian-themed staging. The man who'd hired Patti LaBelle to sing Happy Birthday for his 60th was serenaded by Gwen Stefani on his 70th. After Happy Birthday, the peroxide pop star took a, quote, a quick twirl with the birthday boy around a dance floor constructed inside a two-story tent where acrobats shimmied and jumped, the New York Times reported. Unlike a decade before, when Schwarzman's glorious pre-bust bash sparked condemnation from sources as conservative as the Wall Street Journal. This time, the festivities sparked very little blowback. In her story, Bloomberg reporter Amanda Gordon reveled in the comparison with Schwartzman's 60th. There were some differences, though. She wrote, "Remember that beautiful fur coat on Melania Trump? It was New York in February on a weeknight. This time, no bundling required, with many folks golfing and swimming all day before a balmy night and fireworks alongside a full moon." Howard Marks, the co-chairman of Oak Tree Capital, a vulture firm that had bought and flipped 3,000 foreclosures, told Gordon, quote, "The world is an uncertain place. A lot of people are unhappy with a lot of other people. There are a lot of things that people are upset about. So it's nice to have an evening where everybody's happy, harmonious, and upbeat." End quote. There was a lot of celebrating to be had. In June, the gang got together for the marriage of Steve Mnuchin and his third wife, actress Louise Linton, almost 2 decades younger than him. And then it continues from there. The book is Homewreckers by Aaron Glantz. It's 34 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. Anthony in Long Island, New York. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Thank you. My problem with what's going on is that I'm hearing a lot about Democrats focusing on changing the messaging and not enough critique of the Democrats' what I think is inadequate response to the economy, which is the #1 issue for most voters. Highest inflation in 40 years, and the Democrats, who have the majority, through reconciliation, which didn't require any GOP votes, couldn't pass a $15 wage, and didn't even try to pass Medicare for all, or even the public option Biden promised during his campaign, which he hasn't spoken about once since he's been in office. And I think when you do a few things for the working class, but you don't do what's needed. This moment needed transformational action, and we didn't get it. And the concern is, where do we go? Because I no longer feel like I have a home in the Democratic Party. The last piece is what they are spending money on is concerning for me. No cuts to ICE, no cuts to Citizens Border Patrol, and the highest military budget in history. And people are struggling. The Inflation Reduction Act is not having an impact.
We got it, Anthony. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, Anthony, I let me put it this way. There's things I agree with you on, right? I think defense spending is too high, and Barbara Lee and I formed a caucus to try to address it. And there's more I'd like to get done. But we have a 50-50 Senate and a 4-seat majority in the House. So any few folks can hold anything up. So no, are you going to pass Medicare for all? No, we have 120 sponsors. We need 218 votes. We need to do more building around that, right? Here's the reality, though, what we did pass. We passed the American Rescue Plan that put money in people's pockets, $1,400 checks, got shots in people's arms, got kids back to school safely, and got people into jobs. And the first money that went to state and local governments. Then in fall, 4 presidents have talked about putting money into infrastructure. We put over $1 trillion into infrastructure, going to create 1.5 million jobs, good paying family supporting jobs, as well as 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations to help address climate, investing in broadband, et cetera. Then we passed the CHIPS Act to bring more domestic production back for things like computer chips and some other products that we saw we really needed to because of what happened during COVID. And that's going to be a game changer in producing even more jobs that are going to be good family supporting jobs. And then on top of it, we passed the Inflation Reduction Act that's going to have us being able to negotiate for drug prices through Medicare to finally lower the cost of prescription drugs, cap out-of-pocket expenses for seniors to $2,000 for prescription drugs, cap insulin at $35. We wanted to do everybody. Republicans wouldn't let us by the way the Senate rules work. In addition, we're going to reduce emissions by 40% by 2030. The biggest climate change bill, a serious bill that's ever gone through Congress. So to say that we did nothing is saying that you are ignoring the many, many, many things that we did. This is the most productive session since I've been in Congress. Any one of those 4 bills would have been the biggest bill that came through a session. So I'm going to continue working for Medicare for all, but I need to get about another 100 people in the House to being willing to vote for that. And I'm going to keep working to lower the defense budget, where we're going to have to try to get more people to realize that they should have accountability. In the meantime, though, I'm not going to trash the many good things that we've done just because we didn't get some other things done.
Thank you for that. As Anthony was going through his list, I was thinking back to over the weekend on Facebook, somebody who's a regular Republican troll on our Facebook page had posted a rant that was almost word for what he was saying. And I thought, oh my God, this guy's a Republican troll. But I thought, I'll let him go on. And then when he started getting into I no longer have a home in the Democratic Party, I knew he was a Republican troll. In fact, I flagged him for the next time he calls in. I've got his phone number and ID here. But the perfect response is, yeah, you're full of it. Thank you, Congressman. Alan in Seattle, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, Representative. As a retiree receiving Social Security, I'm always frustrated that I have to pay tax on a tax that I've already been paying into the government. Is there any chance that the next Congress can, eliminate that tax? And if you can't, does the tax I pay on my Social Security go into the general fund, or is it and should it be returned to the Social Security fund? That's my question.
Yeah, I'll tell you. Let me take it a little bit more globally, Alan, because this is what I believe, and this has been a beef I've had with even some of the folks in my leadership. We should have passed the Social Security 2100 Act this session. We had, I think, 208 sponsors, could have got the votes. A few people were nervous, but this is a bill that would extend the fund for 60 or 70 years. It would raise the tax that people pay into for those who make over $400,000 would start paying in again. Right now, it's a regressive tax. At $146,000, you don't pay another dime in, and they'll go up every year depending on what the economy looks like. But it's really regressive because those who are making less pay their full paychecks in, and people don't who pay more in. It also would have extended benefits to be the CPI-E, not the Consumer Price Index, but one that affects spending that seniors do, more money on medications than gasoline, et cetera. It was a good bill, a very, very good bill, and we should have passed it. It's one thing that Republicans want to put it on the chopping block every 5 years, and it's your money that you've paid into, as you said, through your account, through your paychecks. But it's another thing that we need to fix it. We have a good plan out there to fix it. And I think if we would have done that, we would have had a really strong thing to argue, especially to contrast with the Republicans wanting to cut Medicare and Social Security.
Joan in Rochester, Minnesota, you're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, Representative Pocan. This is about Social Security also. The thousands of people that pay into the Social Security like a savings account for themselves. And then there are so many people that pass away before they've even taken one penny out of their Social Security account. Does that money help to make Social Security solvent, even though that's a, kind of a unkind way of talking about it? But there are people that don't ever get to use any of the money that they've put in. And if it goes back in to help all the people and keep that solvent, we don't need outsiders coming in from big business and making a profit off of what all these hardworking people have done all their lives and what they count on as their retirement fund. It's not a 401k or something like that. But I'm on Social Security, and I don't know what would happen to me if that was taken away from me. So people ought to remember that,
right,
that it is being paid into by people that are not around anymore.
Thank you, Joan.
Yeah, Joan, and I'm sure that's part of how we factor, the life of it and the benefits on it. I just would argue it just makes so much more sense to just lift the cap and have people who make more than $146,000 pay in either at the same percent like everyone else does who's making less than that, because you extend the program for decades and decades by doing that. And I really think that's about fairness. So that really is, I think, one of the best plans. Also, I should mention Social Security 2100 also would lift that, how much you can raise, which is about 18,000 or so now, or you can make in a year before you have to start losing your benefits of Social Security, would raise it to a level that probably fits where we're at today, and do a number of other things that'd be really positive. Social Security 2100. We need to pass it in Congress, and then we would be doing exactly what you want, making sure everyone who's paid in gets their benefit, but we don't have to allow any outside private schemes to come in.
Susie in Palestine, Texas, excuse me. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Palestine. I just
Palestine,
had to say
okay, thank you.
That's okay. Thank you for taking my call. And I have a question regarding the endless commercials that come on right now through the enrollment period on Medicare Advantage Part C. I know that you're trying to work on a bill to get, it taken care of, that they're saying they're Medicare. But in the meantime, is there any way maybe you could have someone do a PSA, public service announcement, that comes on, either after these commercials or something to educate people? Because a lot of people I talk to, they don't have any idea, especially when they're fixing to go on to Medicare. They're just confused by all the information, and they think that Part C is something they're supposed to get. And hearing all these commercials and all the mail that you get, it's just very confusing for a lot of people. And I'm afraid if they don't, if something happens to so many people, they keep saying, well, we have so many people taking advantage of Medicare Part C now. Well, that's because people aren't realizing just exactly the problems with Medicare Advantage. So I'd hate for the Democrats to get blamed for something they didn't know because the information wasn't provided to them. So that's my question. Is there anything that can be done, like a public service announcement, to combat this disinformation?
Yeah, Susie, so, the media decides what they're going to do with the public service announcements, right? We're not going to be able to dictate necessarily, and they may not run something. Part of why we did the bill, the timing we did, was because it's the open enrollment period, and we're hoping that some of the press around this might make people at least question a little more when they're talking to someone. Because you're right. I actually watched Fox News for an hour the other night in my hotel room, doing a little opposition research, and watched the Mike Huckabee ads for these plans. I watched William Shatner, watched all the commercials were all over about these plans. And it's true on a lot of cable networks with different people selling these plans. And at the end of the day, only Medicare is Medicare. And to keep Medicare as strong and as important of a program as it is, we need to do something about making sure people realize that you may not get all your benefits with these programs. So it's having conversations like this, having more out there. The New York Times did a great piece showing how they've overbilled the government and people haven't gotten, the great deals that they were promised. We've already done one GAO study. We're looking at another study that's covering some more areas in this. And I think eventually we're going to get to the point that we realize with the majority of people signed up for these programs, people aren't getting a program as good as the original Medicare. But for now, I think the best we can do is have these conversations, Susie.
Tom in Huntington Beach, California. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Yes, sir. Representative Pocan and Mr. Hartmann, keep up the good fight for democracy. I got a question. With the record profits of the oil company in the trillions this year, is there any way to threaten them with stopping the subsidies or seriously pass a windfall profit tax?
Tom, absolutely we should. Here's the problem. There are too many folks, including, unfortunately, in the Democratic Party, who represent some of these oil-producing areas and allow their constituents work for it, and it becomes very difficult to do, I think, some of the things that I think we need to do around big oil. The best thing we can do, honestly, is continue this push around electric vehicles, because if we don't have to rely on foreign countries and these big oil companies that are not our friends by any stretch of the imagination, and we can go to renewable types of having vehicles, that is the single best thing we can do. I know that Ro Khanna and others have various windfall bills, and I'm very supportive. We should try to do those. However, when you have a 50-50 Senate and a 4-seat and maybe a 3-seat margin now, because I think we just lost a member from Florida who resigned early, it's really difficult to get some of these things across the finish line.
Yeah. It's 47 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls. Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at repmarkpocan. He's a former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. We'll be right back with more of your calls. He's also on the Appropriations, Education, and Labor Committees in the House of Representatives and represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. We'll be right back with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with Middays with Mark. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Sir Thom Hartmann and Lord Mark Pocan, good day to you both. Mr. Pocan, I'm going to claim you as my congressman from now on. You are my congressman. My question is regards to Moore versus Harper. Congress, Article 3 of the Constitution, Congress has the power over the Supreme Court. If Supreme Court approved Moore versus Harper, which basically said that state legislature can throw your vote out, what is Congress going to do? Are you going to counter it? I'm counting on the Progressive Caucus to fight this issue because basically it's going to have a great effect on the Democrats, and it's the last pin the last pin on the coffin in this thievery of our democracy. Moore versus Harper. What are you going to do to counter it if it get approved? Thank you, my congressman.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Omar. Glad to have you as part of my district. We'll extend a little line out to your house. Hey, I don't know enough about the Supreme Court case to give you an answer. I think that would be a fair, intelligent answer worthy of what you're asking. However, almost anything, if the Supreme Court makes a decision, much like they did recently on the Dobbs decision and how that affected Roe, we can do things like codify Roe, which we did in the House. And again, because of the rules, we can't get through the Senate right now. So, there's always actions that we can do on anything. I just don't know enough of the specifics of the case to give you, I think, the answer you're looking for, Omar.
Chuck in Hood River, Oregon. You're on the air with Representative Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. A real quick one. Why don't the Democratic Party buy themselves a TV channel? We've got all kinds of people out there. We've got clowns from one end of the spectrum to the other to match whatever they throw up, and they define the agenda, and we just follow it and go right along with it and make a fool out of them all the way and get a lot of commercials in place with a lot of Democratic supporters and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Yeah, Chuck, it's an interesting idea. I mean, I think, we've tried to have the media, have people on the media talking about our issues. It's an expensive proposition to have a channel, and then you have to have people watch that channel, and that's another, proposition out there. I don't know how exactly that would work. I mean, I know what you're saying. Right now, Fox and OAN and some of these other networks are really extensions of not just the Republican Party, but of the extremist MAGA wing of the Republican Party, and that certainly has been very effective. I've always been a big fan of radio. In fact, just today, Tom, we were talking about, I had a New York Times reporter reach out to me about Wisconsin and some of the programs that Ron Johnson goes on, because he's a pretty voracious user of, talk radio in Wisconsin. And we have quite a conservative network here, although we're starting to get a progressive network here, which is awesome. But I think, rather than maybe the party owning it, is if we were a little more better on getting the group messaging out there, and Republicans have done a really good job on that. I'll give you that. We are a very diverse party, and sometimes we don't deliver the message quite as well, but I think that might be the better answer. And by the way, I love Hood River, one of my favorite places. It's one of the most beautiful places in the country.
Yeah, it truly is.
Yeah.
We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan in just a moment. It's 51 minutes past the hour. I'll be back in 60 seconds. Have to go read an ad over on the commercial side for Instaflex. And then we'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. Stick around. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. Are you feeling sad and depressed? Are you anxious, worried about the future, feeling isolated and alone? You might be suffering from capitalism. Symptoms include homelessness, unemployment, poverty, hunger, feelings of powerlessness, fear, listlessness, disenfranchisement, isolation, loss of identity, self-loathing, feelings of guilt, loss of free speech, incarceration, fines, suicidal thoughts, death, or revolution. Now, that's kind of the funny one, but the serious thing is that capitalism, unregulated capitalism, unrestrained, laissez-faire, neoliberal capitalism, no income tax capitalism, no regulation capitalism, does produce this kind of a crisis. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to, and you know, thank goodness we are moving in the right direction, I think, back toward regulated capitalism like Franklin Roosevelt gave us, rather than the unregulated neoliberal capitalism of the Trump years. I got a video about this over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out. Tag you're it. And welcome back. We're taking your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You are on the air with Representative Pocan.
Hi, guys. Mr. Representative Pocan, I talked to Tom last week about Social Security. If Social Security becomes a variable income, this will destroy the credit rating of everybody who has any type of Social Security check. Because if your income is variable, you're not any better off than a person who's working X number of hours each week. This means that when an elder needs to get a loan to replace a roof or to extend a bathroom and make it handicap accessible so they can stay home, or just need to get anything done, new car loan, if their piece of junk fails and they have to have, someone's going to have to co-sign because that variable income is not going to have the status to maintain any kind of credit union. So you're talking about the economy and the inflation. You need to put this little fact out in front of all the other representatives who are out there campaigning, that if you want to keep the House and keep Social Security as a stable financial base in the United States, you better get out there and fight. Because if they take it away from us and it becomes variable, oh, well, there's not enough money this year to give you what you had last year. And then they tell us the same lie next year. Yeah, one of my neighbors gets $700 a month. She has an EBT card. They're talking about taking away EBT cards also. If you don't get out there, all Democrats, and tell people what is happening with their psychological attack of, oh, well, the economy is terrible, gas prices are horrible, this is all Biden's fault. If y'all don't get out there and tell them what their long-term plan is, this will destroy the United States.
Let's get the response here. Let's get the response.
Yeah, I hear you, Norma, and you make a good point that, you know, if that income suddenly could be going down because they're putting it on the chopping block, that could affect people's ability to get credit and other things as well. When, you know at least you have a base level, you have that guarantee, and so do people who make loans. I just think in general, we shouldn't be waiting until after the elections and potentially after something bad could happen to the House or Senate and then trying to defend Social Security. We should be dealing with this right now. There is a bill that Democrats have, Social Security 2100 by John Larson in Connecticut, that does many good things that will extend the program and increase people's benefits and help fix some of the other issues around income while on Social Security. I have no excuse why we're not putting that up for a vote, because that would be such a strong contrast to their efforts to cut Social Security, which, again, is your money. You pay into it out of your paycheck on a regular basis.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Pocan, thank you so much for being with us today and for these middays with Mark every week or every other week as it works out. Thank you so much for dropping by today.
Yeah, of course, Tom. Thank you. Look forward to it again.
Me too. Congressman Mark Pocan, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. Up next, Professor Richard Wolff. Is there a plot among other nations to kill the dollar and bring the U.S. economy to its knees? and Putin and Mohammed bin Salman are behind it? We'll talk about that on the other side of this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman, who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalism, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, "In light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, the co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, including The Sickness is the System, When Capitalism Fails to Save Us from Pandemics or Itself, now available as an e-book. Also the host of Economic Update with Professor Richard Wolff right here on Free Speech TV, democracyatwork.info, Prof. Wolff on Twitter. Professor Wolff, I'm reading, this was from the Daily Pfennig today, but I've seen this in other places as well, this speculation that Saudi Arabia might join the BRICS nation, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and that these nations are working as hard as they can to get off the dollar, basically, to go to an alternative currency, whether it's the euro or whether it's a basket of currencies. Saudi Arabia has really been playing with fire with regard to this. What might happen if that were to happen? Could it shift oil off the dollar, and what would the result of that be for the United States and the world?
Okay, the BRICS is in no way a secret organization or one that is trying to hide from a notoriety. I obviously don't know what they might be doing privately, but they've been around now for quite a few years. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they have attracted growing attention. Saudi Arabia is not the only country where there's a rumor. At this point, there's not much more than a rumor that they are applying for or intending to apply for inclusion in the BRICS. Other countries mentioned alongside: Turkey, Argentina, Mexico, and still others. What you're seeing really should be understood in the context of the decline of what really has to be called the American empire. We came out of World War II, the only real powerful economic unity that still was intact, that hadn't been devastated by war, which Western Europe, Russia, China, Japan all had. And we occupied this absolutely dominant king of the hill kind of position. And that could only really go in one direction, and that was down. And it's been remarkable in many ways that it has lasted as long as it did, pretty much the second half of the 20th century, now really beginning to show wear and tear and decline. We had not in the picture at the end of World War II the People's Republic of China. That has come the farthest, the fastest to change everybody's calculation. It makes the BRICS a much more powerful reality than it would be if China were not part of it. And so I think that to answer your question, the dollar being the global currency of record, the currency most people want to have in their account if they hold more than their own currency, the currency used as backup, as reserves in central banks around the world to show that you can deal in their currency, because if push came to shove, you could always change that currency into the dollars that they possess. It means, if you want to be simple about it, that we can ship to the rest of the world dollars with which we buy raw materials, food, technology, whatever it is we buy. We get real work done by people, valuable output, and we just give them little green pieces of paper called dollars, with which they can either sit there literally holding the dollars, which some of them do for a good bit of it, or they lend it to the United States government to hold U.S. treasuries, which gets you the bizarre result that foreigners are lending money so that the United States can pursue a foreign policy with which those countries often disagree. As, for example, China disagrees with us, but holds an enormous amount of its dollar wealth in the form of U.S. treasuries. What's happening is that we're about to lose that privilege. BRICS is not the only force in the world trying to do this. There are others who have their own reasons. But what they're all doing is looking for something that's an alternative. Probably won't be the euro, because that has its own problems, especially now. More likely, it would be a basket of currencies. It may even be a new invented electronic currency. They're all playing with crypto in order to make the thing work better for them and make it less of a gain for the United States. They've wanted to do that for a long time. One of the things it'll do is it'll mean that oil won't be priced anymore in dollars as it has been. Although recently, because of Ukraine and so on, a number of countries, Iran, Russia, China, and others, have begun dealing in oil anyway, in other currencies, their own or third currencies. So you're beginning to see the erosion of the dominant position of the United States coming at it from all sides, including people that are political allies and people that are political adversaries. I think what Americans have to do, and have hesitated, is to understand that in this century, the American empire is in decline. I don't know the future any better than anyone else, but I know that we have to face the fact that little changes at the expense of the United States are going to come. They're coming. They keep coming. They are enlarged by the Ukraine experience, and they're going faster because of it. And there are going to be adjustments. And much of what happens in the United States economy, whether we acknowledge it or not, is a struggle over who is going to suffer in this process. Who's going to lose out inside the United States as we struggle one with the other is an important consequence at home of the declining position globally.
I'm curious, that's fascinating. Thank you very much for that. I'm curious your thoughts on Liz Truss in the UK and the crisis that they're having. She tried to basically roll out Reaganomics version 2, and it was like the sky fell in on her. What's going on there? And what's your opinion of Liz Truss?
Very, very important what's going on. I don't know much about her, and as best I can tell, and I follow the British events, she will not be prime minister much longer. We'll see, but from everything I hear, no. You're absolutely right. She did exactly what everybody does. She came into office. She's a conservative, so she's a little more gung-ho about these things, but Labor has done that, just like Democrats and Republicans often do remarkably similar things. Here was her plan, usual plan. Cut taxes on the rich, dropping the corporate tax, dropping the top bracket of the income tax, and meanwhile, throw something to the mass of people so they don't scream that you're helping the richest among the people. Britain, by the way, has seen the growing inequality of wealth and income, just as we have in this country. So that was to be some help in coping with the high energy prices, which, of course, are the result of the sanction war between the West and Russia. She thought she could do like they always do, give a cut to the rich, say like the tax cut of Trump in 2017, and spend a little more, well, at least symbolically, on the mass of people. And how do you do that? How do you spend a little more over here when you're cutting taxes over there? Well, you just borrow. That's what everybody does. We've been doing it to the trillions of dollars in the U.S. in recent years. But here is the warning for us here in the U.S. This time, the very wealthy people who usually take the taxes they get cut, that they don't have to pay anymore, and instead lend that money to the government, those people have decided lending money to the British government at this point of its economic troubles, coupled with its debt, too risky. They're not going to do it. And in that moment when they said, no, we're not doing this, the whole game, the whole scam, which is really what it always was, this game of being the magical politician who could do it all, spend more money, not raise your taxes, with no one looking, that the rich who didn't have to pay taxes now lent that money to the government because it's a no-brainer. Which would you rather do? Give the government a tax payment, end of story, or give the government the same money as a loan, which they give back to you while paying you interest for the time that you hold it? That was always a scam. Now that scam has led the beneficiaries of it to say, oh, no, we're not lending this time because you're in too much trouble. That blew up Liz Truss's government. That blew up the whole plan that they have to start from scratch with a budget at a time when Britain is in extreme difficulty. But there's an important message for us in the United States. How close are we to seeing a president, Biden or whoever comes next, doing the usual, cutting a tax over here, spending more over there in one way or another, as they all do, only to be brought up short, and it's a career-ending short, to be told by the private capitalist markets, we're not confident in your ability to handle any more debt, so we're not lending it to you. At that point, they don't become the magicians who can do everything. They're the people whose economy is falling apart and whose government can't function. And that doesn't make you look good. It makes you look like Liz Truss looks today.
Yeah, we just have 30 seconds. I find it fascinating that the top marginal tax rate in Great Britain was 45%.
Right.
And she proposed to drop that to 40%, and everybody freaked out. Our top marginal tax rate is what, 33%, 35%? I don't...
It depends a little bit. Yeah, the higher 30s, yes.
So, I mean, does that mean that we're in trouble already?
Well, no one really knows because it's one global capital market. The question is, are they going to conclude this week, next year? I don't know any better than anybody else. Are they going to conclude that the endless rise of the debt is going to lead the United States not so much to default, but as to get to a point where some populist politician is going to say, we can't do this anymore. We can't service this debt and run a country, so the debt is what's going to be sacrificed.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Yeah, I get it. I'm sorry, we're out of time. Professor Richard Wolff, thank you so much for dropping by.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
We'll be back. And welcome back. Alex in San Pedro, California. Hey, Alex, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Yeah, good afternoon, Tom. Thank you for all the hard work you do and the people behind the scenes. Really appreciate it. Question, it seems like the Republicans are telling their constituents and supporters not to vaccinate, not to mask. Now, if a commander in the military tells somebody in a chain of command something similar, that's terrible leadership. So could this be so those people get sick and then they fill up the hospitals and then they say, look, Biden is killing all these people or it's his fault or whatever, besides all the stuff that they're doing already?
I think it's more that they're following the path that Donald Trump blazed. What happened back in 2020 was that Trump, first of all, he realized the economy was crashing and that presidents who preside over a crashed economy very rarely get reelected. I mean, that's just a fact, and he knew it. So he knew he probably wasn't going to get reelected. So then the question became, how do you get people to show up to vote? And he had to, and how do you try to keep the economy running in the middle of a pandemic? And so what he did was he leaned on the CDC, and we're just learning about this. We just learned about this yesterday, actually, that Trump was applying pressure to the CDC to downplay how severe the pandemic was, to downplay the danger of COVID, and so that his message of, oh, it doesn't matter, you can go back to work, there's nothing to worry about, it's just like the flu, when he knew these were all lies. But he was desperate to get people back to work and get consumers back in the stores because he was desperate to get the economy back going so that people would vote for him. And so he developed this whole, lie-based pseudo-reality that COVID wasn't that big a deal, that there's already over-the-counter remedies like, ivermectin that you can buy in the local feed store. No big deal. You don't even need to see your doctor. Or if you do see your doctor, get yourself some hydroxychloroquine. And in fact, you could also buy that at the feed store. And I mean, he was promoting these lies. And now we can look back and see that, a couple 100,000 more Republicans died of COVID than did Democrats because they were following the advice of Donald Trump and Fox News, that this was all an effort by Donald Trump to minimize the economic damage being done during his administration so that he'd get reelected, and to encourage people to show up at the polls, fearlessly at the polls, rather than do mail-in voting, because he and Louis DeJoy had this plan to mess with mail-in voting. And now Republicans are stuck with the fact that they've been promoting this lie for, 2 years now, and they can't go back. They can't say, oops, I guess we were wrong. And really, they don't have to now because so many people are vaccinated across the country that, like Joe Biden said, functionally the pandemic is over. Obviously, it's still with us and it's still a problem. But so that's why they're continuing the lies, Alex. Does that make sense?
Indeed. Another thing then, when they were going to mail those masks way back when, and they canceled it because it was ravaging blue states and things like that. At that point, isn't that the pandemic being used as a genocide then?
Well, I'm not sure you could call it genocide because that means targeting a specific, racial or ethnic group. But it was murderous. I mean, like I said, several 100,000 more Republicans died than Democrats, and more Americans died of COVID than citizens, on a per capita basis, than citizens of any other developed country in the world, and citizens of most other countries in the world, period. So, yeah, Donald Trump was essentially a mass murderer, in my opinion. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. There's an amazing number of criminal and civil investigations and lawsuits against Donald Trump, that range from the espionage grand jury investigation. This is a federal criminal investigation into Trump and people around him committing espionage, to the January 6th grand jury investigation, a separate grand jury looking into the crime of trying to overthrow the government. Obviously, you've got the Trump Organization tax fraud investigation, Letitia James in New York State. You've got the Trump Organization tax fraud being investigated also by the city. Fulton County, Georgia is looking into, Trump's attempts to get 11,780 votes out of Brad Raffensperger. You got the January 6th committee that goes, without elaboration. The Senate is investigating Bill Barr's Justice Department, the former Justice Department. And then there's a whole series of individual lawsuits against Trump, from Mary Trump to others. I've got a video with a complete list over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. "24 minutes past the hour." My op-ed today over at HartmannReport.com is, an in-depth look at the most successful con in American history. In fact, the title of it is "The Most Successful Con in American History Laid Bare." And basically, it's about this Powell memo in 1971 that said to American industry, at that point in time, American industry was not particularly engaged in politics. And the very, very wealthy in America were not engaged in politics. They had done that back in the 1930s. It blew up in their faces. The whole America First movement throughout the 30s, the the pro-Hitler movement in the United States, and they kind of learned their lesson. But Lewis Powell said, "You guys have got to get back in the game," and they did. They put together this massive infrastructure that included a network of think tanks to change and eventually control public opinion, a filtering organization to help pack the courts with young right-wing ideologues, multiple right-wing media empires that would help elect Republicans and influence political discussion across the political spectrum, and a place and to put business-friendly professors in schools and colleges to train up a new generation of right-wing ideologues. And as a result of this, they have now created a national group that brings together lobbyists or Republican state politicians to write and introduce legislation in every state in America. Major national think tanks that churn out policy papers, newspaper and magazine op-eds, talking points for conservative media outlets, all this kind of stuff. Right-wing media outlets in every state of the union, including hundreds of regional newspapers and television stations, thousands of websites, the outside presence of paid trolls across all meaningful social media outlets, and over 1,000 right-wing radio stations. State-based think tanks or policy centers in all 50 states, each working with the Republicans to convince people of right-wing policies. Both federal and state-based dark money groups that oversee moving literally billions of dollars from corporations and the morbidly rich into basically political campaigns. And groups that bring together the CEOs and senior executives of America's largest companies to, effectively coordinate and provide cover for lobbying, fundraising, and other political activities. And they're at it. I mean, and what's amazing is they're so omnipresent that they can take essentially non-issues like critical race theory. There is no, critical race theory is not being taught in our public schools ever, anywhere, period. Never was. And turn it into a national campaign out of thin air. This is how powerful and effective these guys are. If we want to slow this down or stop it, We need to end Citizens United. The Supreme Court brought us this mess. We can fix it by overruling the Supreme Court.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
There's a lot more detail in there. You can check the whole thing out over at hartmannreport.com. In this camera, right? 3. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Minority Leader, How to Lead from the Outside and Make Real Change by Stacey Abrams. This is from chapter 1, although the introduction is fascinating too, where she talks about, Rhodes scholarships and stuff, but this is chapter 1. I sit in the living room, a cozy space, warm in the early summer. I'm perched on the edge of a sofa next to Valerie, the home's owner, a lovely black woman in her late 40s. Across from us, seated close together on a wide settee met for one, are her 2 children, a son and a daughter. Politicians rarely visit their streets, which are nestled in a poorer community in South Georgia. Valerie beams with pride that both her children are headed to college in the fall. David, 17, plans to study criminology. Maya, 18, her belly round with her first child, intends to become a middle school teacher. Both newly graduated from high school, Maya will give birth in mere weeks and begin college months later, an unwed teen mother. Her intended school is more than 3 hours north of her home, so her mother will raise her newborn baby while she starts her freshman year. Valerie speaks matter-of-factly about the coming challenge, raising a new child just as hers leaves the nest. Still, she is determined that both her children pursue college degrees that she never received. Maya, the mother-to-be, wonders how she'll do so far away from home and her baby. Yet in the next breath, she explains how college will be the best for her and her child. Their future success rests upon her. I've come to their home as part of my campaign for governor, so I asked Valerie what she expects of someone like me. What can I do to help make lives like hers better? In her soft voice, she replies, she just wants options for financial aid for her children. They will succeed, she says, if they can afford to stay in school. As I look around the modest home passed down through the generations, I understand both the pride and the desperation tangled in her response. She got them through and has given them the tools to carve out better lives for themselves. We chat more about the worries she's lived with all those years, our discussion turning to the crime and poverty in their neighborhood. Then I ask Valerie what she wants. At first, all I get in response is a quizzical look to suggest I need to reconsider my bid for higher office. Or that suggests. I repeat, what do you want for you? What secret dream do you have for yourself? Her confused expression turns to one of surprise. I don't know, she tells me. I've been a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly for 20 years. You must want something, I probe, something you'd like to do for you. A daycare, she admits quietly. I'd like to start a daycare center for unwed mothers like my daughter, so more girls can finish school and pursue their dreams. But that ambition is beyond her. Her body language, her tone of voice, her averted gaze speak louder than her words. I press her, but she demurs with a smile. Let's just see what happens if you win the governor's job, she says. Valerie's house in South Georgia is not too different from the squat red brick house where I grew up on South Street in Gulfport, Mississippi. An oak tree grew out in our front yard, shadowing the front sidewalk, forbidding grass to grow beneath its shade. Pink azaleas bloomed each spring from bushes that flanked the front door. Our rented house and the others set close by teemed with children, all black, all working class. We played in our postage-stamped yards, make believing the fantastical. Superhero exploits, cops and robbers. As we got older, we'd talk about moving to New Orleans or living in one of the mansions along the beachfront that lay less than 5 miles away, across the railroad tracks that ran in between our neighborhood and the more wealthy environs. We dreamed of more, while our parents' lives centered around survival and making it from paycheck to paycheck. Instinctively, we understood that more had to be possible, even if we didn't know what to do to get there. These imaginings, these desires, are the roots of ambition. As adults, like Valerie, we tend to edit our desires until they fit our construction of who we're supposed to become. In such a world, I wouldn't dare dream of running for higher office, for mayor or governor or president. At least for now, Valerie sees herself retiring in 20 more years from Piggly Wiggly as a cashier, rather than as a small business owner who helps the community raise its children. From our brief meeting, I could see she had the fire, albeit of a low burn, of a minority leader. She had ambition, she had vision, but she didn't have the faith, and understandably so. Whether we come from working class neighborhoods or grow up comfortably middle class, minorities rarely come of age explicitly thinking about what we want and how to get it. People already in power almost never have to think about whether they belong in the room, much less if they would be listened to once outside. These men, and they are usually men and typically white, do not have to grapple with low expectations based on gender or race or class. Ambition for them begins with reminiscences of old times and older friendships or newer alliances. The ends have already been decided. Only the means are to be discussed. Most potential minority leaders feel the same lack of faith Valerie had, at least at some point in their evolution. We may not know how to get the first job, let alone make it to the big chair. We don't know how to take the leap from accepting our fates to actually changing them, and not just a little, but radically. Then there are those who simply don't know what they want. The drive to achieve burns inside, often without a clear target. We want to be something, but what that is remains hazy. Often we cannot articulate our goals because they lie just beyond the reach of who we're supposed to be. Ambition's scale is irrelevant. What holds us back is not scope, it's fear. And because we don't know what to call our dreams, don't know how to make them happen, or are pretty sure we'll be disappointed, we just stand still. We become a minority, but becoming a minority leader demands that we embrace ambition, as I would do, Stacey Abrams. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour, picking up your phone calls. Victor in Grass Valley, California. Hey, Victor, what's on your mind today?
Well, Tom, we got a flyer in the mail for United Healthcare Medicare Advantage. So I was going to go to this meeting. I wondered if you can give me some information on how to counter this guy. I was going to buy a bag of lollipops and go and hand them out to all the people that are in the audience and then counter his lies later. So give me some ammunition.
Well, one question you could ask is it true that if I'm on real Medicare, that if I need any kind of tests or services or surgery or whatever, my doctor prescribes them and I get them done, and I don't have to get anybody's approval. But if I'm on your program, everything has to be run past your people, your insurance company people, who, according to the New York Times, about a sixth or a seventh of the time, deny services that Medicare would pay for.
Right. Now, when did they lose the right to use Medicare with their Advantage name?
That was in 2003. In 2003, this whole thing was invented. There was no Medicare Advantage before 2003. And George W. Bush and the Republicans put this thing into law in 2003 and invented this thing called Medicare Advantage, these private health insurance plans. Another question, just a very simple question, would be, you guys are why, not why, but Medicare Advantage is just private insurance. I wanted to get on Medicare to get off private insurance. I'm sick and tired of dealing with you for-profit hustlers in the insurance industry, and I want real Medicare. Although that's so confrontational, they'll probably just kick you out of the meeting, or you'll get booed out or something like that.
Oh, well, no, if I with the lollipops, I think I'll explain to everybody, this is what they think of you. You're just suckers. So if you sit here and remain here, you're just going to be suckers.
There you go.
So, but what I wanted to know is, you were saying the other day that they were going to lose the right to use Medicare with the Advantage.
I doubt it. I doubt it. Mark Pocan and Ro Khanna have written legislation. It has not yet been introduced. They're gathering co-sponsors right now in Congress that would eliminate the ability of Medicare Advantage to use that word Medicare. But I'll be astonished if it even gets a vote in the House of Representatives. It's a great effort. It's, for the moment, it's largely a symbolic effort.
Yeah, that's what I thought. They were running out here to get everybody they could before that happened. Okay, so that's not a fact.
No, they're just running out to get everybody they can. They're at 49 point something % of Medicare is now privatized. Excuse me, is now privatized through Medicare Advantage, and once it's over 50%, then the full court press is going to be on to say, you know, more than half of Americans have voted for private insurance. Let's just do away with Medicare altogether.
Okay, well, I'm going to go get thrown out of this meeting today.
Well, call us back and, you know, tomorrow or later on in the week or next week, you know, whenever you can, and let us know how it worked out, okay?
I sure will. Thanks.
I saw that. I got an email from my doctor saying that they're holding a meeting like this to sell Medicare Advantage to their patients, and I'm like, oh my God. And I fantasized. I had this fantasy of going and confronting them, but I thought, you know, I don't really want my doctor pissed at me. But anyway, Victor, thank you. Thank you. Keep us up to date on that. I appreciate it. Steve in Riverside, California. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Long time, first time.
Thank you.
I'm calling about my concern about this. I'll call it an overused Republican candidate talking point about American suffering due to inflation. It seems like every time they're being interviewed, they say, oh, Americans are suffering from inflation. But I don't see anybody asking them what they're really going to do, what Republicans are really going to do about curtailing inflation.
Right.
If you really think about it, are they going to cut the windfall profit tax on oil companies? Are they going to say that we shouldn't export any more of our own homegrown oil overseas? Are they going to say that we shouldn't allow the two top major grocery chains to merge? Are they going to say that they're not going to cut Medicare's ability to cut drug prices? On all these cases, they will not do anything. There really isn't anything that they're going to do other than just say, well, we're going to drill more oil and we're going to cut regulations, and then we get more CO2, and then we get more sick people due to the chemicals. So why doesn't anybody bringing this up?
Well, I can tell you the Republican response to this already, and it's one of the reasons why Democrats have not been messaging on this, is because this Republican response contains a germ of truth, and which is why it's so potent. And that is that what they'll say is, when the pandemic was happening and economies around the world were crashing, governments around the world started pouring money into the pockets of average people to keep them afloat. And, you know, that was arguably a good thing, like what happened during Trump's presidency. But then once the vaccines got out, people, you know, governments were continuing to put money in people's pockets, like, you know, the Democrats did under Joe Biden in 2021 with the, I forget what they call it, the American Rescue Plan, I think it was called. And that extra money in the pockets of average people is what has jacked up demand, and that jacked up demand is causing inflation. It's causing a response by corporations saying, oh, you're not price sensitive anymore, we'll raise prices on you. And there is some truth to that. And it's not a lot of truth, and that's not the principal cause of inflation. It probably accounts for 5 or 10 or maybe 15% of our inflation. But it's real. And, you know, for that reason, I think it's a mistake for the Democrats to avoid the topic altogether because of that. But that's what they'll say. And in fact, that's what they are saying. If you watch Fox News or listen to Right Wing Hate Radio, they're saying all this inflation is the cause of Joe Biden because he passed the American Rescue Plan, and now his Inflation Reduction Act is going to make things worse because it's more money for American people. I don't agree with those things. I think that saving the American people, saving families, keeping people from being thrown out of their homes, you know, a 1-year bump or a 2-year bump even in inflation is probably a small price to pay for that. And most of the inflation is not caused by that. Most of the inflation is caused by the increase in oil prices. And the increase in oil prices is simply the result of the fact that 20% of the oil, 30% of the oil that we produce in the United States, instead of being turned into gasoline and sold to Americans at lower prices, is being shipped overseas, most of it to Brazil to help out the Bolsonaro government because he's running for re-election and he's trying to keep gas prices low down there. So I think Democrats should engage in it.
It just seems like
you've explained it very logically, and you could even put that caveat on it. But if you think about it, the Republicans being a pro-business organization, they're not going to do anything that's going to cramp the style of corporate America.
Oh, of course not. Of course not. Joe Biden, by the way, just finished announcing that he's going to release 15 million more barrels of oil from the strategic reserves. Again, if we simply banned the export of oil, we would have a far greater surplus than just 15 million barrels. And, you know, when 30% of our total production here in the United States is going overseas, like I said, most of it to Brazil, the rest of it to a lot of the rest of it to Mexico and China. You know, we should be stopping that. You know, it was illegal from 1972 until 2015, and you know, we did just fine not exporting any oil in 2015. In fact, our gas prices were very low in 2015. The reason for that is because you couldn't export oil produced in the United States. Steve, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Bob in Desert Hot Springs, California. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks. A couple of observations, Tom. I wanted to get your take on it. A large part of this inflation, in my opinion, is the after effect of the pandemic. And President Trump handled that so inadequately that, you know, he lit a fire to it. And when Biden came in, he kind of like put the water on it and got things better.
Yeah, Trump didn't even have a plan to pass out vaccines.
Right. So I think that's a big part of our inflation now, the after effect of that, of Trump's mishandling of it. And nobody's really mentioning that. And point number two, Tom, to get off the subject of that, the Ukraine war, the horrible Ukraine war, what Russia's doing to them. Don't you think that Trump had something to do with that, too, playing footsie with Putin for 4 years? And who knows what went on in their private conversations?
I think so. I'm not sure that you can necessarily tie that to inflation unless you say that, unless you point out that, you know, Trump's embrace of Putin for 4 years empowered Putin to feel that he could take out Ukraine. I mean, obviously, he was hoping to do it with Trump in the White House. Trump would have supported him. And now you've got Kevin McCarthy coming out and saying that if the Republicans take control of the House or Senate, they're going to block any further aid to Ukraine and just basically hand Ukraine to the Russians. So the Ukrainians have got to be looking at the U.S. elections, you know, with essentially terror. I mean, it's grim stuff. Bob, thank you for the call. Morris in Long Beach, California. Hey, Morris, what's on your mind today?
All right, Professor, if you want a $50 donation to your program, you got to answer this question correctly.
Okay.
Who is the queen? Who is the queen of the January 6th insurrection? We know Donald Trump is the king of it, but who was the queen?
Well, you know, who was giving guided tours to insurrectionists? By the way, we don't take contributions, but yeah, I don't know. You know, who was it?
The queen of the insurrection is Jenny Thomas.
Oh,
and I'm
yeah.
gonna tell you a little something. When she came into the January 6th, this is why I called you my brother. When she came into the January 6th to give her testimony, and of course they were negotiating everything, one of the things that she negotiated was, that's why she had this smirkish attitude on her face when she was going in there and the press was asking her questions. One of the things that her attorneys negotiated was her testimony is not videotaped.
That's right.
Now, we got everybody else, but we don't have hers. And I'm just, you know, I'm scratching my head. I don't have much hair. The little bit I got, I'm losing it on that one. But I don't understand that. And also, the midterms are here. I mean, let me get on to something else, remember. That I'm scratching my head on that one. But another subject, the midterms are here. What the Democratic Party's got to do, my brother, they got to put the Republican Party, the entire party, on blast. They've got to show images, in my opinion. They got to show the homeless. They got to show white poverty. They've got to show white poverty. We've got to show this economy is in the laps of the Republicans.
And they got to show kids being shot up in schools.
Preach. See, they always come in with a false narrative. The thing here is the circulation of money and the tax structure that we have today. The way things are set up, we're not only robbing the government because they can't do what they used to do, but we're robbing our own people. So the Democratic Party, they got to put the Republicans all throughout. Forget the candidates because it's the party. Got to put them on blast, Tom.
Yeah.
Thanks for this moment.
I'm with you, Morris. I'm with you. It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls on the other side of this break. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, your media support group for We the People.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Joe Biden just said to the oil companies, you guys are sitting on profits. Yeah, how about that? And welcome back. Randy in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Randy, what's on your mind today?
Hey there, Tom. You know, we seem to have as economic policy a belief that certain types of inflation are good. For example, the real estate market has had inflation for a bunch of years, but we call it appreciation. And part of the problem that we run into nowadays is that the real estate market is being taken over by investors who sometimes control up to 20, 30% of the rental market in certain towns and communities. And I think there's a simple way to resolve that problem, and that's to limit the tax deduction for anybody who owns either an LLC or an individual or a portion of an LLC to maybe 10 properties. They don't get a deduction for anything over 10 properties.
Yeah, I would agree, only I'd put it at 3.
Well, you know, it can't be bad to have people owning some property, mom and pops, and, you know, providing an income. But once it gets into a business or maybe even LLCs, then you eliminate it.
Right.
The other thing that I found that's in an inflation concept is when people tell me that Biden's caused all this inflation, I ask them specifically, which of Biden's program caused double-digit inflation in Europe and caused huge inflation problems in Japan? And they look at me and their eyes are glazed over. And I say, you think it was the Inflation Reduction Act that got passed by Congress this year? And they have absolutely no response.
Yeah, brilliant, Randy. No, I have known a number of people in my long life who bought a house, and in fact, Louise and I debated doing this twice, and just ultimately decided that we didn't want to get into the landlord business. We were too busy running our own companies. But I've known people who, own a house, have a little bit of equity in it, and decide that they want to move, and instead of selling the first house and buying the second house, they just buy the second house and hang on to the first house and turn it into a rental property. And, I have one friend who did that with 3 houses. He ended up with 3 houses in addition to the one he was living in. And by the time he was in his late 40s, early 50s, those 3 houses were providing him with enough rental income that he could quit his job. He retired, basically. And spent the rest of his life being a professional landlord. And he was a good landlord. I mean, he only had 3 houses. He was paying attention to his tenants. He was keeping the houses up. He became kind of the handyman, and that was his job. I don't have a problem with that kind of middle-class entrepreneurialism in the housing realm. But when the housing realm becomes commercialized, when you've got giant hedge funds coming in and buying, 5, 10, 15% of the housing in a market, coming into marketplaces with literally bags full of cash or of checks and buying homes at auction, for cash or running these ads, we'll buy your home for cash, that kind of stuff. I think that's extraordinarily destructive to an economy. I think it jacks up rental prices. We know that every small increment in rental price increases has a correspondingly small increment but measurable increment incremental increase in homelessness. I mean, this is driving homelessness in the United States. It's driving the affordability crisis. And it's putting people even closer and closer to being one paycheck away from being, homeless, being destitute. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a huge problem. And I live it here in Southern California. I'm getting remarried, and we've got $100,000, and we can't afford to buy a house in Orange County.
No, it's the same thing here in Portland. I mean, the median home price here in Portland is, I think it's over $500,000 now. And it's certainly well over 400, 450, thereabouts. And it's like, when I was a kid, the average home cost 2.2 times the average annual salary. Now it's over 10 times the average annual salary. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. If you believe that someone is a billionaire without seeing their taxes, if you believe someone is a genius if they hide their college grades, If you believe someone is a great businessman, if they bankrupted casinos. If you believe somebody is an irresistible ladies' man, if they have to pay for sex or even accused of rape. If you believe somebody is a philanthropist, if their charity got shut down for fraud and their children had to go through mandatory training about how not to commit fraud with philanthropies. If you believe someone is a patriot, if they got out of the draft during a time of war by submitting phony, dodgy x-rays showing bone spurs. If you believe someone is a Christian who doesn't go to church and doesn't know what 2 Thessalonians is. If you believe someone is an innocent man if they refuse to testify, well, you're not just gullible, you're a Trump supporter. I have a whole video about this over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Joy in Issaquah, Washington. Hey, Joy, what's up?
Hi, I was just calling in. We've had a lot of callers talking about what are we going to do about the Democrats missing on messaging to the voters who actually vote. So I took it upon myself to go on to change.org. I've put together a petition. It says Democrats improve messaging to win midterms and beyond. And I put 6 points regarding inflation, where we are exporting all our gas, we're selling our ports to foreign interests, gouging costs for incoming goods. We've got Republicans voting against prescription drug caps, supporting privatizing Medicare. We're getting fleeced on the Medigap policy, but less payouts. We've got increased crime in red states, and their candidates are inciting violence, which increased the costs we have to pay. And they're blaming it on us for increased taxes to pay for it, but they're the ones inciting violence. There's also the environmental costs that are increasing due to their denial of severe weather events and climate change. And they're blaming Democrats. Democrats just need to talk about these things. I also have a point in on what we've actually done, the Rescue Act, the increased infrastructure spending, the CHIPS Act that's bringing in jobs and U.S. self-reliance, the credit tax for working families' income, that's been increased, Medicare for all that we need to be pushing, and mental health funding that if we give this to the at-risk individuals, crime would go down, and the windfall tax for billionaires. There's all these issues that they could just be talking about, and not to mention keeping religion out of government as stipulated in the Constitution. If they'd mention any of these things, we'd win. And they're just kind of hanging their hat on abortion. But the people that vote, right, vote,
I totally get it, Joy. It's a great list. It's a great list. I wish you the very best with your petition. And frankly, you should be writing ads for the Democratic Party. John in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for educating me and all of us 5 days a week. Love it. Hey, when the governor was on, you had a gal called, and she was asking him, what is up with all these Medicare Advantage commercials on TV? And his comment is what made me to call you. I need you to educate me on this. Whatever party is in charge, or is it the president, who's in charge of the FCC? Because don't these TV companies have to comply by the FCC? And if the answer is yes, who in the FCC is allowing these TV commercials to take all this money just so they could spew all this violence and hatred and lies on TV over a buck versus democracy? Can you please educate me on this?
Outside of gratuitous violence and sexual content and the 7 dirty words, the FCC, by and large, does not regulate content on television anymore. And so it's not a matter of the Federal Communications Commission. Arguably, it would be, well, it wouldn't even be the Federal Elections Commission, because Medicare ads are not about elections. You could arguably go to your state attorney general, and claim fraud. I think it's unlikely that it would get a positive reception. John, the problem is that this law that George W. Bush pushed through in 2003 to privatize Medicare is very explicit. Medicare Advantage is now recognized by the federal government. The booklet that Medicare the Centers for Medicare Services sends out every year. It has probably 4 times as much information in it about Medicare Advantage as it does about real Medicare. It's basically a sales pitch for Medicare Advantage. That needs to change, in my opinion, among other things. But, George W. Bush set this system in place to privatize Medicare, and the Democrats have not stopped it, tragically. And it's just rolling along. John, I got to run, but thank you for the call. We'll continue the program right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the hartmannreport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglas lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglas was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglas was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book, and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. You will recall, first of all, in the first hour of our program, we had Congressman Mark Pocan, the former co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, on for the entire hour taking your calls. Our middays with Mark here frequently happens in the first hour of our Wednesday program. Also, in our second hour, Professor Richard Wolff dropped by about the plot by Saudi Arabia to join up with Brazil, Russia, India, and China and South Africa to replace the dollar and bring the U.S. economy to its knees. And the most successful con in American history laid bare. That was the title of my rant in the second hour. And I just wanted to expand on that a little bit, because this is my op-ed over at HartmannReport.com today. And that is that the most successful con in American history has been the $50 trillion transfer of wealth from you and me, from the middle class, from working class people, into the pockets and the money bins of the top 1%. Over the last 40 years, $50 trillion has moved out of working people's pockets and into the pockets of the very wealthy. I've mentioned before, I grew up in a lower middle class neighborhood in Lansing, Michigan. The house my dad bought in 1956 or 57 was a $15,000 house, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath. In fact, it's still in my family, but when my dad died, we looked at selling it, and it was worth about $90,000, just to give you a sense. And back then, in that neighborhood, the entire neighborhood was houses almost identical to that because it was a brand new subdivision built in 1956. And I would say on the block that I lived, pretty much everybody who lived in this neighborhood, the dad worked at Fisher Body or General Motors, or in my dad worked at a tool and die shop, so one of the local industries that supported the auto industry. And there were 3 families just on my block, just one single little, city block, that I knew had summer homes up in northern Michigan. They weren't fancy, they weren't mansions, they were, somewhere between a shack and a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom place, but they had, little hunting lodges and whatnot. They could afford that because they worked at Fisher Body or General Motors back then, because everybody had a union. And they were making damn good money. My dad was able to take a vacation every year. He bought a new car every 2 years. He was able to pay off his house. He had a pension when he retired that went to my mom when my dad died. So, that was the middle class. That was the wealth of the middle class. I guarantee you none of those families in South Lansing any longer have a second home. None of them. It's just, the middle class has been gutted. 65% of us were in the middle class before Reagan came into office. Now it's 45% of us. And before Reagan came into office, you could be in the middle class with a single paycheck. Now it requires 2 to be in the middle class. This is this giant con, the single most successful con in the history of the United States, this massive transfer of wealth. And how did they pull it off? They created this enormous network. First of all, Lewis Powell issued the call to action in 1971 and said to the billionaires and the big corporations, we need to get together. We need to take control of the courts. We need to buy our own media and take control of the media. We need to take control of Congress. We need to take control of the state houses, the state legislatures in every state. That's going to be among the cheapest. We need to build an infrastructure of right-wing radio stations all over the country and television stations. We need to have think tanks. We need to grow think tanks. Keep in mind, in 71, when Lewis Powell wrote this, the Heritage Foundation did not exist. The Cato Institute did not exist. In every one of the 50 states, there is a state policy institute. None of that existed. ALEC didn't exist. None of this stuff, this huge right-wing infrastructure, none of it existed. It all came into being throughout the later 70s and throughout the 80s. And now that massive infrastructure is so powerful, particularly with regard to the media, that they can just make up complete lies. Like, oh, they're teaching critical race theory in our elementary schools and it's damaging our poor little white children, which is a lie. On its face, critical race theory has never been taught in an American public school ever, and isn't now. But they've passed laws against it in 21 states. Or trans kids are predators lurking in your kid's bathroom. There's never been a trans kid in America busted for anything like that. This is it's a non-issue. Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, running ads about how she passed legislation to stop trans athletes from competing in high school sports. There's been one trans athlete in the history of South Dakota, and that was a decade ago. But she's passing law, and it caused no problem whatsoever. But she's passing laws now to stop this scourge, this non-existent scourge. They have such an infrastructure that they can literally manufacture outrage, manufacture issues, and get them on the national stage, and they become issues that change elections. There is literally nothing like this on the Democratic side. We do not have massive think tanks on the Democratic side. We do not have, billionaires who own basically the entire party the right-wing billionaires own the entire Republican Party. There's not a single Republican, not a single elected Republican in Congress right now who's willing to take on the fossil fuel billionaires and say, no, we need to do something about global warming. Not one. And yet on the Democratic side, there is no infrastructure like this. This infrastructure, just the Koch network infrastructure, just the stuff that started out with Charles and David Koch, and now much of it is independent of them, just that Koch infrastructure has more employees, a bigger budget, more offices than nationwide than the entire Republican Party. They've become the tail that wags the dog of the GOP. And again, there's nothing like that on the Democratic side. There's no unifying message. So the most successful and effective con in the history of America is the transfer of $50 trillion of wealth out of the pocket of working class people and into the pockets of the top 1%. Which brings me to Judd Legum's piece over at popular.info this morning, The Real Stakes of 2020. This is amazing. He notes in 2022, Republicans are spending millions on tens of thousands of ads claiming that Democrats in Congress are soft on crime and want to defund the police, which is a complete lie. The American Rescue Plan was signed into law in March of 2021 without one single Republican vote. It provides $350 billion in additional funding for police departments all across the United States. In the House, 220 Democrats voted for it, 210 Republicans voted against it. Since 2019, most major cities and counties, particularly those run by Democrats, have significantly extended their funding or expanded their funding for the police. Republicans are seeking to make significant cuts in Social Security and Medicare spending, and yet the media is paying absolutely no attention to this whatsoever, in part because the Democrats are not screaming about it. Back to my rant about there's no unified message. Judd Legum notes a database search of major U.S. newspapers in the Nexus database over the last 7 days found 16 stories that discussed crime as a major issue in the midterm congressional elections. None of the newspapers in the database published an article that discussed House Republicans' scheme to force benefit reductions in Social Security or Medicare. Republicans are ranting about crime. Hey, crime becomes a story in the newspaper. Democrats are doing something about trying to protect Social Security and Medicare, and Republicans are saying they want to destroy it. Doesn't appear. Literally doesn't appear. The database included the Los Angeles Times, the Boston Globe, the Dallas Morning News, the New York Times, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and 39 other major newspapers. They note on Sunday, crime was mentioned 20 times on NBC's Meet the Press, 9 times on ABC News this week, 19 times on Fox News Sunday, and 3 times on CNN's State of the Nation. But did anybody mention the Republican plan to kill Social Security and Medicare? On Meet the Press, Bernie Sanders mentioned it once as part of an answer to an unrelated question. That was it. That was it. This is the state of American media. This is the state of this election. It is being fought on Republican terms because Republicans own the media. They own the mechanisms of information. They own the think tanks. They own the state policy networks. They own the state legislatures. We got to do something about this, my friends. This is not good. 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And this is just the beginning. I got to tell you about Steve Bannon's disturbing quest to radically rewrite the Constitution. And we've got a geeky science about glaciers and pandemics. And welcome back. Mary in Long Beach, Washington. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Oh, hi, Tom. I love your show. I love what you're doing for the country.
Thank you.
I'm angry with the Democrats about the economy and not fighting back on inflation and everything you just said, the media and the infrastructure. But what I wanted to say is I think Democrats are so frustrated that they're not fighting back on inflation, at least, because, as you recall, Bill Clinton saying it's the economy, stupid.
Right.
and
And it
had it
still
stuck
is.
on his computer to always remember it. And we are not looking at it. And the saying that we can't fight back because there's an ounce of truth in something the Republicans say, I'm sorry, but I think that's a dodge.
I think it's pathetic, and I said so, Mary. But
Yeah,
you know,
I
rather
mean-
than just sitting here and complaining to each other, what do you want to do about it?
Well, what I want to do is say we need to point out, we need to not only challenge and talk about inflation, we need to challenge the Republicans, because it's the Republican industries that are supporting Republicans, the billionaires and the giant corporations that are supporting price gouging. They're denying passing the windfall profit tax, which is designed to curb price gouging.
I know, and it passed through the Conservative government in the UK. It's in place right now. Qasim Rashid tweeted. Now this was back in February, but Michael Moore just retweeted this or reposted this. Chipotle, 26% profit increase. Guess what? They're raising prices. Starbucks, 31% profit increase. Guess what? They're raising prices. McDonald's, 59% profit increase. They're raising prices. Shell, Mobil, BP, 60% in profit increase. They're raising prices. He notes this is not a labor shortage. This is not inflation. This is 100% corporate greed. And that's exactly what you're talking about, Mary, and I'm completely with you. Thank you for the call. Jim in Novato, California. Hey, Jim, thanks for listening to KFOI. What's up?
Oh, yes. Well, Tom, thank you for everything that you do and get out there. But as you were talking there, it occurred to me that, you know, real power is what the people have. And
in theory,
knowledge, you know, in knowledge, we get good journalism and we get the actual facts. But and so the only vestige that we have to that power now is our vote. And yet all this money is coming by way of, through Citizens United channels to suppress the vote, to, give deranged ideas in people's head, not the truth, is to ensure that the power stays with those who have money, because it's an agreement. I think we came to that before, that money's the power. If you have it, you've got power, and if you don't have it, you don't have power. But that's an illusion. The real power is in the people, and the last vestige we have is with the vote. And the very rich, and I would have to even say that the Republicans are more like the sheriff of Nottingham of the very, very rich. They're doing the dirty work, but it's the very, very rich that are.
They're stealing from the poor to give to the rich.
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
Reverse Robin Hood. It's like, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're all Sheriff Nottingham.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jim. I'm with you. Thank you very much for the call. Yeah. And what are we going to do about it? We need to elect more Democrats, and we need to elect progressive Democrats, not Kirsten Sinema kind of Democrats. It's 20 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment, and more of the news of the day. I got to tell you about Steve Bannon's disturbing quest here. Stick around. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So Mother Jones Magazine got a hold of some leaked audio that was taken of Steve Bannon. He was talking with a group of people on October 31st, 2020. That's in the days prior to the election. Now, at this point, everybody in America who was paying serious attention knew that Trump was going to lose this election. The polls were showing this. I mean, he lost by 7 million votes. You can't bury that. You can't hide that. That's a freight train coming down the road at you. He knew he was going to lose. Bannon knew he was going to lose. And Bannon tells this crowd that Trump is going to declare victory on election night because he knows that a lot of the Democrats didn't want to show up in person at the polls because of COVID, and so they mailed in their ballots. Republicans weren't so concerned, and Trump is going to be ahead. And he's predicting exactly what's going to happen, which raises the question, how well planned was this? It really looks like there's a conspiracy. You can check it out. There's a whole video about it at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. 21 minutes past the hour. A fascinating piece over at The Guardian by Ed Pilkington. It's titled Inside Steve Bannon's Disturbing Quest to Radically Rewrite the U.S. Constitution. This is something I have been telling you about for years. I have been doing this program for 19 years. It'll be 20 years in March of next year. And all that time, I have been warning you about this effort that is funded by a group of right-wing billionaires to call an Article 5 convention in Washington, D.C., and basically rewrite the Constitution of the United States. Take out of it, the general welfare of the population, make it basically into a libertarian document, turn America into a third world country. This is, with a grand poobah running it who can be king for life, like Donald Trump. And Bannon is completely in on this. He told his viewers last month, he said, quote, "You now have a political movement that understands we need to go after the administrative state." And by the administrative state, he's talking about the federal government and Congress being involved in things like the climate crisis, helping schools, setting education standards, fighting health inequalities, dealing with, crises like homelessness and all that sort of stuff. I mean, over and over and over again, this is what he's all about. Mark Meckler, a founder of the Tea Party who now leads one of the largest groups pushing this, it's called the Convention of States Action, spelled out his prime objectives on Steve Bannon's show. He said, we need to say constitutionally, no, the federal government cannot be involved in education. The federal government cannot be involved in health care or energy or the environment. He says the problem is anytime the administration swings back to Democrat or radical progressive or Marxist or whatever they are, we are going to lose the gains. So we need a structural fix. The structural fix, of course, is rewriting the Constitution. And they're moving along. Russ Feingold just recently told The Guardian, he said they want to rewrite the Constitution in a fundamental way that's not just conservative, it's minoritarian. It will prevent the will of the majority of people from being heard. How does that work? Well, they give each state one vote in this constitutional convention. And so California, with 39 million people, has one vote, and Wyoming, with about 1 million people, has one vote, and Montana has one vote, and Idaho has one. All these low population states, they all get one vote, and the high population states, they also get one vote. And so, this is how the Senate is organized right now, and that's why the Democrats in the Senate represent 43 million more Americans than do the Republicans. They have been super busy around this. They have been raising money like crazy. They've been they're putting candidates into state legislatures and into Congress who are all in favor of this. They've been holding dress rehearsals of this for a decade now in Washington, D.C. Much of the dark money that is funding this is coming from the same people who funded Donald Trump, the Mercer Family Foundation, Robert Mercer, Leonard groups run by Leonard Leo, according to this article in The Guardian. And they note that, it takes 36 states to do this. In 2010, Republicans controlled just 14 state legislatures. And then they got on the ball. The right-wing billionaires started funding the Tea Party big time. In fact, they created the Tea Party. And they started really, really pushing right-wing radio into these red states. And so they went from just controlling 14 state legislatures in 2010, a mere 12 years ago, to 31 today. Ann Pearson, the Center for Media and Democracy's executive director, says Republicans are near the high watermark in terms of their political control in the states. And that's why the pro-Trump right wing of the party is increasingly embracing the Constitutional Convention strategy. They are making no bones about it. Rick Santorum, we have the opportunity as a result to have a supermajority, even though we may not have an absolute majority. In other words, the majority of Americans don't want us to make it illegal for the federal government to help out people in times of crisis, to do away with FEMA, to do anything about the environment, to help out our schools, to provide, social safety net, to have welfare, to have Social Security and Medicare. All those things would go away under this rewritten Constitution. The American people don't want it. But hey, we may have the majority of the states. They got 31 states right now. That is a majority of the states. Mark Levin, the right-wing talk show host, is really pushing this hard. And he says they should even have the ability to overwrite federal statutes and Supreme Court rulings at the state level. Just 2 months ago in July, 2 bills were introduced into the U.S. House calling for an immediate constitutional convention, both by Republicans. Nancy Pelosi blocked them both, but hey, more coming. And if they control Congress, if Republicans take control of the House of Representatives and the Senate this time around, they'll do it. They will absolutely do it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I have a geeky science for you on the other side of the break about viruses and glaciers, and then I'll be picking up your phone calls. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified, we have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds.
2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home, a temple to the new India, or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a ghost story by Arundhati Roy.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. A fellow over on Twitter, Paul Ferry, put together an amazing Twitter thread with clips from newspapers starting in 1894. In 1894, the newspaper was saying, nobody wants to work anymore. In 1905, nobody wants to work anymore. In 1916, nobody wants to work anymore. The story is a little more than that, but I'm going through this quickly. 1922, what's the cause of unemployment and hard times? Nobody wants to work anymore. 1937, orchardists complain of shortage of labor because nobody wants to work anymore. 1940, nobody wants to work anymore, says the governor of Wisconsin. 1952, nobody wants to work anymore. 1969, Sunday segment on the TV news titled, Nobody Wants to Work Anymore. 1979, and then, he goes to 1981 and 1999 and 2006 and 2014 and 2022. Yeah, we've been hearing this for a long time. There's a whole video clip about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. "35 minutes past the hour, our geeky science of the day. This is rather concerning. That's kind of the bad news. The good news is that there are these virus labs around the world. I realize, the part of the QAnon conspiracy theory is all that they're all terrible things, and oh my God, look out. There was one in Ukraine, don't you know, and one in Taiwan, and one in China. But there are labs around the world that are looking at new viruses that could attack humans and figuring out, what's dangerous and what isn't. But this is, there's this lake called Lake Hazen, and it is the largest high Arctic freshwater lake in the world. It is basically a lake made out of icebergs or ice flows or ancient glaciers that have melted. 20, 30, 40,000-year-old ice that is melting into this lake. And they just did this viral analysis of it, this DNA analysis of it. Now, we have seen ancient bacteria attack us in the past. For example, in 2016, in northern Siberia, they dug up an infected reindeer carcass that was thousands of years old. It had been frozen for thousands of years. And a child and 7 other people were infected and killed. A child was killed with anthrax that had gone dormant in this thing. But researchers from the University of Ottawa, looking at Lake Hazen, this Arctic lake, sequenced the DNA and RNA samples, and the proceedings were published in the Royal Society 8 newsletter. And what they found was that, sure enough, there's lots and lots of viruses there. They're still sequencing them right now, but similarly, researchers at Ohio State University in the United States announced that they had found genetic material from 33 viruses, 28 of them brand new and unknown, in ice samples taken from, for example, the Tibetan Plateau in China. In 2014, scientists in France's National Center for Scientific Research in Marseille managed to revive a giant virus they isolated from Siberian permafrost, making it infectious again for the first time in 30,000 years. So, this isn't, freak out and pull your hair out. There are people monitoring this stuff and trying to be very, very careful about it. But holy cow. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls here. Brian in Middletown, New Jersey. Hey, Brian, thanks for calling. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. I just want to talk a little bit about the Republican, how they're spinning the economy against the Democrats. But the fact is that Democrats create more jobs. They have better GDP performance. Every GOP president since Hoover's had a recession. And as far as the current inflation battle, which I think is, I'm not going to say transitory, but it'll abate. It is starting to abate, according to people like Professor Siegel at Wharton School. It's a combination of the supply chain. We had a surge in demand. Supplies had to catch up to balance the supply and demand. So until that happens, you're going to have inflation. But also, and this is, I think, more important, and nobody talks about, 3 Federal Reserve interest rates cut in 2019 when we didn't need them. We were told the economy was the greatest of all time. We had 3 cuts in 19. Then we had more cuts.
This was,
20.
by the way, if you think back to that time, Brian, Donald Trump was going on TV trashing Jerome Powell and saying they need to cut the interest rates. They need to cut the interest rates. And there was no reason to cut the interest rates, but Jerome Powell did it to goose the economy because Donald Trump knew that an election was coming.
And he also actually threatened to fire him. And there was a whole debate about whether he has authority to do that.
To threaten what?
Powell caved in.
Threatened Powell.
He threatened to fire him. He threatened Powell to fire him. And the point, though, was that I have to wonder how independent they are, because you might remember in 2015, going into the 2016 election cycle, they increased interest rates to slow the economy down, and the Republicans beat Obama over the head over the slow pace of the 2016 GDP performance. A lot of it was due to that rate increase. I think what they tried to do is give the economy a sugar high going into the election in 2020. Their plan failed because of a virus. Otherwise, that SOB would have been reelected. I have no doubt about that.
I agree.
But I want to say one final thing. I had a debate once with Senator Johnson. I sponsored a real estate conference. I was president of a firm that did business with real estate firms in D.C. I brought him in.
You're talking Senator Ron Johnson? Wisconsin?
Yes.
Okay.
And he was running for, this is 2015. He announced that he was going to run again in 16. And he didn't think he would win. But the essence of his message to this group of CEO real estate firms was the need to redo Social Security. He was attacking Social Security. And I raised my hand and I said, why don't we just do what the Moynihan Commission did? We got to tinker with it. We got to raise the retirement age. We got to maybe raise the tax rate, the salary base. But it's survivable. He didn't believe that. This guy, I'm telling you right now, if it's left up to him, you're not going to recognize what's left of Social Security.
Oh, I agree. Ron Johnson is taking money from Wall Street banks, and he wants to privatize Social Security. He's taking money from the fossil fuel industry, and he wants to deny climate change. He's taking money from right-wing evangelical groups and hysterics in general, and he wants to ban abortion. I mean, he's arguably, and he keeps sticking up for Putin. I mean, he's arguably the most toxic senator in the United States Senate, Ron Johnson. And, I am hopeful that Mandela Barnes can beat him in this election. I realize Johnson is pulling the race cards super hard. They're running all these television ads and mailing out flyers and things. making Mandela Barnes look even darker than he's a black man, darkening him, making him look kind of sinister. Yeah. And, and finding pictures of him where the expression on his face is kind of sinister, and trying to claim that he's like on the side of the criminals and all this kind of stuff. I don't think that the citizens of Wisconsin are that stupid, but never underestimate a Republican electorate. Never, ever underestimate Republicans.
I'll tell you one other thing about that is, yesterday I'm watching a baseball game, the Padres game, and I do that just so I get away from this discussion. I just want to wind down a little bit. There were 4 commercials by the Republicans aimed at the southern border, dark-skinned people committing crimes when they come to the United States. Ironic that half the players on that field were from Central South America and dark-skinned guys.
There you go, Brian, the hypocrisy of it all. Brian, thank you for the call. Bruce in in Nicoletta, Washington. Hey, Bruce, what's on your mind today?
Hey, what's up, Tom?
I'm here.
Hey, okay, I'm here too. All that Medicare talk, I got a phone call a little while back. I had this happy voiced fellow on there saying, I'd like to talk to you about this and this and this and this and Medicare Advantage. And I said, my best happy voice, I said, oh, Medicare Advantage, yeah, you get the discounts on the teeth cleaning and the eyeglasses and the free goat yoga and everything else, and all this stuff like that. And he says, yeah, that's us. I don't know about the goat yoga, but that's us. And then I went in my best happy voice, and I proceeded to tell him basically how they get, you get these people on, they're overcharged for this and that, and how they go back and they scoop the money out of the trust fund for Medicare. And he hung up on me right there when I got finished.
Yeah, somebody called earlier and said he was going to an event for one of these things. And it just occurred to me, somebody called a couple of days ago and said that their best way of shutting down the Medicare Advantage people when they call to try and sell it is to simply say, if I get cancer, will my doctor be able to prescribe any kind of therapy or any kind of surgery or whatever treatment he wants without your insurance company looking over his shoulder? And, they can't, the answer to that is no. He won't be able to do that. We are going to look over his shoulder. And so I don't know if that guy is still listening, but that's a great question, too. And you might try that next time. Bruce, thank you for that. Scott in Seattle. Hey, Scott, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. This is the time of year as the election approaches where I'm once again reminded of something I don't understand and never will. I don't think you do either, but I'd like to put it out to your listeners. I got interested in civics in the 1968 election, and then I got a degree in political science from the university, and what I still cannot comprehend is why people don't vote. We're talking about handing strangers authority over my life, taking my tax dollars and spending it on stuff, and why on earth would I not use what influence I have about who that is and what those programs are? I can't understand it, and yet, as the midterms approach, I have to listen to pundits talking about how this or that base is enthusiastic or energized or whatever, and squinting into statistics, only about half of us vote.
Yeah.
I'm going to use your
There's
phrase,
a simple reason
Tom,
for this, Scott.
This is just nuts.
No, there's a simple reason for it. It is inconvenient and difficult to vote in the United States. We are the only developed country in the world that requires voter registration before you can vote, number one. In every other country, and in fact, in most countries, they mail a ballot right to you, period. And, if you have a Social Security number or their national equivalent of that, you get a ballot. In pretty much every other developed country in the world. We came up with this voter registration system in the 1840s in the South as a way of keeping black people off the rolls. They also came up with the idea that if you've been convicted of a felony, you can't vote. That came along during Reconstruction in the South. And that way they could easily, because it was so easy to arrest and convict black people that they could, this is why, basically 1 in 7 black people in Florida can't vote. Because they've been convicted of a felony. And in many cases, they're small or minor or even irrelevant felonies. But number one, you've got to go through the hassle of signing up to vote, registering to vote. And number two, then you got to take time off work. and go vote. And particularly if you live in a minority neighborhood or a Democratic-leaning neighborhood, you may have to stand in line for 5, 6, 7 hours to vote because they want to make it hard. They want to make it expensive for you. And here in Oregon, if you get your driver's license, you're automatically registered to vote. Number one, I mean, you have to check the box certifying that you're a citizen. But number one, and for real ID, you even have to prove that you're a citizen. But, as soon as you get your driver's license, you are registered to vote. And number two, it's 100% mail-in balloting. And we've got, along with Washington State, which is similar to us, there are 5 states now that are 100% mail-in ballot. One of them is a Republican state. I believe it's Utah. And, we have among the highest voter compliance rate. I think it's close to 70% in the nation, like 67, 68%. And it's because we've overcome those two obstacles. And the rest of the country should too.
Tom, you're entirely right, and reform is in order. But, Tom, you never hear about people pondering whether they will or will not renew their driver's license, no matter how much of a hassle that is,
whether
they will or will not pay their utility bills. And, again, what the government legislators, our governors and whatever do affects our lives. I can't understand why people wouldn't take whatever time or trouble it takes to make their voices heard.
I get it, Scott. In Australia, they have 98% voter participation. And the reason why is the first time you fail to vote, you get hit with a $25 increase in your income tax that year. The second time you don't vote, I think it's $125, and it starts going up dramatically after that. So people vote just so they don't have to pay tax, that additional tax. Scott, I got to run, but thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 48 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. Welcome back. Ruth in West Los Angeles. Hey, Ruth, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I have a couple of things, but before I get to that, I first wanted to say thank you for pitching for KPFK. You do a wonderful job.
Oh, thank you.
I always learn when I listen to you, and I just became a member. But anyway, this is not what I called in about, but I do want to ask you one thing, and that is I called in and, said that I thought we ought to try to do something about ending the war in Ukraine, including, talking with Putin or whoever. And you said, do you want to negotiate with Hitler? And, it's kind of a put down, but whatever. I want to know, and this is not what I called about, but do you have any ideas on what we should do, given that the cities are being decimated, people are being blown up in their apartments? Do you have any ideas on that?
Yeah, I think that we should be providing Ukraine with more offensive weaponry. I realize that there's a very good chance that that could bring us into direct conflict with Russia. If we don't stop this guy now, he has already declared he's going after Moldova next. He's said that out loud. And he has implied that he's going after Poland after that. Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia already, they will tell you that he's coming after them. I mean, Putin is just doing a Hitler routine here.
Okay, well taken. Okay, the reason why I called in is I don't know whether you know this, you may, but I want all your listeners to know, Gavin Newsom is a very slick guy. He's handsome. He has some good liberal values, et cetera. And we all know he's aiming, to run for president. Right. The thing that I want people to know is that he's just like any other politician in the pocket of, in this case, PG&E, the electrical company here, which caused the fires and people died in Paradise because they didn't want to spend the money to, update their lines, et cetera. What the issue here is that we have 2 nuclear reactors at Diablo Canyon. They are on earthquake faults. They also are near the ocean, which is the ring of fire, that goes around, earthquakes. And they are 40 years old. People who have worked there said that, it's likely that the pipes or the storage tanks are embrittled, et cetera. And the bottom line is they were supposed to close in 24 and 25. He just gave, PG&E a bonus by extending them. And he has not allowed inspections. And now, bonus, there's going to be a tax that has to be paid if you use solar. So I'm just, saying, he's not all he's cracked up to be, and I want people to know that. And
there are no perfect politicians out there, Ruth. And if you're going to run for president of the United States, or if you're even going to run for governor of a state as large as California, given the rules for elections that have been established by the U.S. Supreme Court, you're going to need a lot more money than you could just get from asking average people to send you a check.
I understand, but this is nuclear. We could be another Fukushima.
I agree. It's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing. We need to fix our political system. And, and I'd like to see that. But, this is what we've got. Ruth, thank you for the call. 52 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around. Hey, I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, How Reaganism Gutted America and How to Restore Its Greatness. Greg Palast calls it a hand grenade of a book. You can pick it up wherever fine books are available. Tag you're it. There are no good solid numbers on it, but it appears that the majority of people who have Medicare Advantage programs or plans believe that they're on Medicare. This is certainly how Medicare Advantage is sold. Oh, you're missing out on benefits under Medicare. It's Medicare Part C, don't you know? C for commercial, right? But people don't realize that when you sign up for Medicare Advantage, you are leaving behind Medicare, and you may never be able to get back to it, or at least not in the way that you could have if you had signed up for it when you were 65 and you stayed with it. And now stepping into this void come Congressman Mark Pocan and Congressman Ro Khanna with the new Save Medicare Act that would prevent this kind of deceptive advertising and marketing by forbidding insurance companies and HMOs and whatnot from using the word Medicare to sell these for-profit plans or these so-called Medicare Advantage plans. We all need to be supportive of this. There's a whole video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. 54 minutes past the hour. Charles in Vancouver. Hey, Charles, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Good smoky morning to you, sir.
Hey,
I just called. Yeah, just called to get your take on the two main races in your state and mine right across the bridge. That is Christine Drazan versus Ms. Kotek, and then Tiffany Smiley versus Patty Murray. And some of the polls have said that Drazan's pretty close, and up in here in my state, same thing. And by the way, I even respected Jamie Herrera Butler, who got replaced with really far-right guy Joe Kent.
Right.
And I was able to thank Jamie personally for voting to impeach Trump, but that she sabotaged her own success. Right. But anyway, my question is, what do you think is going to happen? Because from what I hear, it's close, and I can't imagine our two states turning red. To me, it would be like the beginning of the already end, sir?
Yeah. We've, with regard to the race in Washington State, I frankly don't know that much about it. I have read the stories in the Oregonian and the Columbian, about how Patty Murray might be in trouble. We'll see. With regard to the governor's race here in Oregon, this is an amazing story. We have Tina Kotek, who's the former head of the House of Representatives, Speaker of the House here in Oregon, who is a good progressive and got a hell of a lot of stuff done that, frankly, she never got credit for because she's not, one of these grandstanders, but she got a lot done. And she would be running against a Republican. I'm not going to get into, remind me, what's the Republican's name?
Is it Christine Drazen?
Drazen, thank you. That's right.
Yes,
for some reason, I've got a mental block against her name. She's running against the Republican Drazen. And Drazen is just, your typical Republican crackpot. And so along comes Phil Knight, the richest man in the state, the founder of Nike, our local billionaire, and he throws all this money behind Betsy Johnson, a third-party candidate. And Betsy Johnson is, who used to be a Democrat, and she's taking all these votes away from Tina Kotek. And so it's entirely possible we're going to end up with a Republican as our governor. I mean, it's just, and he and other billionaires in this state are throwing huge amounts of money into the state races. I mean, he said something to the effect the other day of, I'm sick and tired of Oregon being democratically controlled. This, we'll see. We'll see, Charles. I don't have any crystal ball here. I am very concerned about it. Charles, thanks for the call. Thank you for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. In the meantime, get out there and get active. Tag You're It. There's so much to do. There's an election coming. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Take. In addition to bringing you the Thom Hartmann Program here on Free Speech TV and Video Media Online, we also have a whole set of ways you can interact with us and tools you can use to spread the word about the importance of democracy and the threats to it in our republic. First, there's your daily homework. Sue Nethercutt puts together a daily email newsletter that has a link to every story I discuss on the air, so you can find my sources and you can share them with your friends. It's free and you can sign up at thomhartmann.com. Second, I publish my daily take every day over at the HartmannReport.com website. That's also free if you want the daily 5 days a week rant in your inbox. No ads either. Third, we have the podcasts. There's the free 1-hour version of our daily show that's advertising supported. You can find that wherever you get your podcasts normally. And then there's also the podcast of the entire 3-hour show with no advertisements, and that's available by subscription over at thomhartmann.com. So check them all out at thomhartmann.com and hartmannreport.com.